is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam, Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It's Monday, October 21st, 2019. I'm Michael Brooks on a Sam Michael hybrid day. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We're broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On today's program, a brand new interview that Sam just concluded just a couple days ago. Automating Inequality. How high-tech tools profile, police, and punish the poor by Virginia Eubanks. Silicon Valley apparently not so liberating. And speaking of which, Pete Buttigieg is being secretly advised by Mark Zuckerberg. Another reason to hate Mayor Pete, although I have to say, I don't think he needs the advice to help with connectivity. Brendan and Jamie here, Matt on a waterboat trip, Kurdish forces deport border as part of a so-called ceasefire with the Turks. U.S. troops redeploying to Kurdish Iraq, where they are greeted with epithets and stones for abandoning the northern Syria's Kurds. Trump reverses course on hosting the G7 at his club after learning that impeachment-wary Republicans are tired of defending him. Fine, whatever. Bernie Sanders packed Queensbridge. Potentially 35,000 people, the largest rally of the election so far, with speeches by, among others, AOC, Michael Moore, and my personal hero, Nina Turner. Incredible momentum.
It was all right.
It was all right. It was not bad. Peace Now activists suggest that the Warren campaign, in addition to its public shakiness on justice for Palestinians, is playing a double game between public statements and AIPAC. Chile anti-austerity protests take aim at the economic reforms that never happened even after the removal of the Pinochet regime. Solidarity in Lebanon and Iraq. Anti-austerity protests, which reflect what happened in Syria, are taking place across the Middle East, and in Iraq and Lebanon, taking place across class and sectarian lines. That very same agent of Facebook, Pete Buttigieg, is surging in Iowa. UN chief strongly condemns a mosque attack which killed 62 in Afghanistan. Evo Morales leading in the polls in the first round of voting in Bolivia, but they are likely headed to a second round. And Elizabeth Warren, I guess, is going to release her own healthcare plan. I thought she was on board for Medicare for All. We'll see what she puts together. All that. And Joe Biden still hemorrhaging money from private flights. Maybe if that isn't even true, I just wanted to say it again because it's very funny. All that and more on today's Majority Report. Brendan on the board.
Howdy, Michael.
How's it going? How are you feeling?
I'm doing well. I am assuming the Leckian powers of the board today and feeling very powerful.
You feeling that energy?
I really am.
You were not at the Sanders rally this weekend. You were out living good life.
I had some prior engagements, but everything I heard and all the people I saw on the subway who I talked to going throughout the city seemed to have a great time, and we got a lot of clips from it today, so stay tuned. And
one major missed opportunity at the Sanders rally, and I was talking about on my show how the television advertisements for Sanders are not as good in this cycle, and they really need to up that game. TV still matters, and not bringing him out to one mic in Queensbridge was an incredible missed opportunity.
Oh, Back in Black was good, though.
That was hilarious. The fact that Bernie actually did come out to AC/DC cracked me up. But
I'm Back in Black.
It should have been one mic. He was right literally next to the Queensbridge projects, and he's a one mic guy. Like, all I need is one healthcare plan, one mic, one movement. Like, Bernie's been one mic for decades while everybody else was being mediocre. Jamie, what did you think?
I thought it was pretty good. I got to say, I'm skeptical of electoralism, as you know. When it's the phrase "a working class revolution" at the ballot box kind of makes me sad at the end of it. But I think this is really important. He's the best chance we got on a presidential electoral level, and he's talking about class politics and unions, and and racial justice, and it's really good.
I loved what Matt Christman, who I actually ran into there. I loved that he just tweeted out, can't think of a much more privileged than seeing the single best chance to shift our political horizons and provide real material benefits to millions of people than we've ever had, and go, meh. Those are precisely my sentiments. Christman definitely gets the retweet and quote on that. All right, but there's also an election taking place in Canada today. Canada has the advantage of potentially being able to elect a coalition government. I have no doubt that as NDP leader Jagmeet Singh surges in the polls, Justin Trudeau will be, first Justin would ignore him, then he will ridicule him, then he will put on makeup to look like him. And you have an opportunity to vote for NDP. By the way, Jagmeet Singh is the only leader, certainly not the Greens. The Greens, which are a horrific bourgeoisie mess with incredibly embarrassing marketing. They're the only party leader who has said that he will never coalition with the conservative ascendancy. So you are voting against Andrew Scheer if you vote for NDP. And likely it could be a liberal NDP coalition. Here is Jagmeet Singh, the last rally of the campaign, I believe. Last campaign video is campaign released. Look, I mean, I have my critiques, but he's putting something on the ballot in Canada that is unprecedented and reflects this broader global pattern. And it's been nice to see him take off.
Friends, I want to talk to you about what's at stake in this election and why it matters so much. People tell me again and again, they can't wait 4 more years for help. And they're demanding that governments take action. On October 21st, no matter what Canadians choose, I want Canadians to win. In your life, think about the times you made a decision where you chose something out of fear. And think about the times when you took that chance, what happened and how much your life became better. I want to say in this election, you can vote for what you believe in. The Conservatives have made their choice to help out the rich and powerful. Justin Trudeau has made his choice to help out the big polluters and the wealthiest corporations. They've chosen those at the very top. In this election, I choose you. I choose all of you.
He's also faced, certainly a lot of racism and discrimination because of his, Sikh identity. And of the kind of expected stupid sort and disgusting, unacceptable sort that you see, everywhere, but also very specifically the highbrow version of people trying to connect him with Sikh separatist movements and Khalistani politics from the 1980s. And I think it's worth actually noting that there's actually a very strong wellspring in the Sikh tradition that overlaps and reinforces the type of social democratic message that he's putting forward. This is a religion that really does actually preach and talk quite a bit about interconnectedness and community base of solidarity, in fact. So I think the way he has carried those things together in a very seamless way, in a way, again, that really is not just a signifier, but is really deeply connected to his politics, his clarity about anti-racism, and his call to fundamentally expand the Canadian healthcare and safety net and start to move in the right direction on Indigenous people and First Nations rights and environmental rights is extremely laudable and deserves our support. If I was in Canada, I would vote NDP. One of today's sponsors is News Voice, which is the first ever entirely open, crowdsourced, and democratized platform for news. You can download the app for free at newsvoice.com/majority. In a country where the vast majority of news is owned by the same 5 huge corporations, it's important for us to always pay attention to where our news is coming from. Who owns which news out? Who owns which media outlets? And what political biases may be in play? And that's exactly what News Voice helps you keep track of. News Voice is a free, crowdsourced website and mobile app that lets you create a personalized news feed and maintain a clear picture of where your news is coming from and what political slants may exist. It helps you aggregate news from corporate outlets, international outlets, local news, and independent media, giving you access to every side of every story. News Voice is fueled by its community of users who contribute to the platform by fact-checking, submitting stories and sources that are missing, upvoting stories, and writing story summaries. You can also comment on stories and debate politics with other members of the community, and through staying active in the community, you can level up and earn perks on the platform. News Voice Play feature lets you listen to your personalized news feed every day through customizable audio news playlists. It's your own personally tailored radio station for news. Very Luckian. News Voice is a next-generation news aggregator and social media platform that values transparency, good journalism, and productive political discussions. Get totally free access by going to newsvoice.com/majority. I'll put a link underneath this video if you're watching on YouTube. And today's show is also brought to you by Proactiv. It always seems like that on the days you have something important, a pimple appears. But now at Proactiv, you have the solution. With America's number one acne brand, Proactiv has helped fight acne for almost 25 years. And now they've introduced their next generation acne treatment system, Proactiv MD, which contains a dermatologist recommended topical retinoid called Adapalene.
I use it.
Adapalene. A topical retinoid called Adapalene. It's the newest acne-fighting innovation made available over-the-counter to consumers in over 30 years. Old Kelly, who used to be on the boards. This is her testimonial on Proactiv. I've been using Proactiv on and off since high school. The formula has improved over the years, but the ideas remain the same. Proactiv is a program of skincare that gives you short and long-term results. It's the best acne-fighting product that doesn't require a prescription, and it's been that way for a long time. I have sensitive skin, and Proactiv's program has made my skin smoother and clearer without causing redness and peeling. This is the perfect time of year to start Proactiv program for many people because school is starting up soon, and it only takes a few weeks to achieve a notable difference in your skin. Confidence makes all the difference, and going back to school with noticeably clearer skin gives you one less thing to worry about. Proactiv is reliable, it fights acne, it improves brightness and overall appearance of my skin. It's the best regimen I've ever used. That is a powerful testimony from Kelly. You got to follow that advice and get on it. Right now, our listeners can go to proactiv.com/majority to receive an exclusive on-the-go bag, which features Proactiv's T-Zone Oil Absorber, Body Acne Wipes, and Green Tea Moisturizer. That's close to a 100% value. That's close to a $100 value, and there's a 60-day money-back guarantee. Again, that's proactiv.com/majority. Proactiv.com/majority to order and get clear skin for the win. We're going to take a brief break and we will be right back with Virginia Eubanks on automating inequality.
On the Majority Report on the phone, it's a pleasure to welcome to the program Virginia Eubanks. She's an associate professor of political science at the University of Albany, SUNY, and the author of, among other books, Automating Inequality, How High-Tech Tools Profile, Police, and Punish the Poor. Virginia, welcome to the program.
Sam, thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here.
Now, your first chapter is From Poorhouse to Database. Just will you remind people, just because you're using it as an important metaphor, I think here, what is a poorhouse?
Yeah, so it's amazing because we all kind of know what a poorhouse is because it shows up in our language, right? Like, oh, you kids are going to send me to the poorhouse. Or it shows up on our roads, right? There's still roads in many communities called like Poor Farm Road or Poorhouse Road. But we also kind of don't know what they are. So it's this really interesting sort of cultural phenomenon, I think, of the way we think about poorhouses. And I use the digital poorhouse as sort of a metaphor in the book because I think the tools that I'm looking at in public assistance are really sort of more evolution than revolution. And I really wanted to put the tools in context. And that context ends up going way, way, way back in our history, like as far back as 1819, if not earlier. And basically what was happening in 1819 is this huge economic depression, this economic dislocation, and economic elites did what they do when this happens, and they sort of put out a bunch of studies, and the question they were asking in the studies was like, what's the problem really? Is it poverty, that is sort of lack of access to resources, or is it pauperism, which meant at the time sort of that you would ask for help when you were struggling economically. And not surprisingly, for a bunch of studies that came out of Harvard and Yale, the studies all came back saying, the real problem is not poverty, it's pauperism. It's the fact that people are asking for support. And so they invented at the time sort of a solution for that problem, which was to create this system of county poorhouses, which were brick and mortar institutions that basically incarcerated poor people as a condition for receiving help. So in order to enter the poorhouse, if you had the right at the time, you had to give up your right to vote and hold office. You couldn't marry. You were separated from your children, who were then sort of farmed out as free labor as domestics and agricultural laborers. And also the death rates at some of these institutions were really astronomical, like 30% a year. So that distinction that poorhouses created, the sort of deep social programming I think we invented at that time, is this idea that the first thing our public services should do is make distinctions between the sort of deserving and the undeserving poor. And that is why I use that metaphor to place these new tools in sort of that history, that what they do is the same thing that county poorhouses were doing in 1819, which is raise barriers to receiving help so high that nobody but the absolute most desperate people will ask.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And I have to admit, I was exactly one of those people who would use, sort of new poorhouse. I was in the concept, but I had no idea until reading your book about where I start to that notion of poorhouses being basically reformatories. And we definitely hear the echoes of that. Just rhetorically, I can't help but think of Paul Ryan and sort of like his story about the kid who would rather have a lunch rather than, a brown bag lunch rather than free lunch at school. Like there is some type of moral righteousness to not being poor, essentially.
Right. Or to asking for help.
And asking for help is a sign of some lack of moral righteousness or righteousness, period. And so the argument you're making is that we no longer have these poorhouses, but that technology, and I guess you tell me if I'm wrong about this, is creating, is in some way sort of allowing us to reconstruct the poorhouse without it being so clear that's what we're doing.
Right. Yeah. So I'd say that what we're really doing is building, so I talk about it in the book as a digital poorhouse, with these sort of new statistical models, with artificial intelligence, with machine learning, algorithmic decision making, specifically in public service programs. So I look at cash assistance and supplemental nutritional assistance or food stamps. I look at homeless services in unhoused communities. And I look at child protective services as well, that we're building these sort of invisible institutions that contain people, like physically in space, that profile their future behavior and that police and surveil their sort of everyday lives. And I think that's very similar to what the Poorhouse did in 1819. So yeah, I do think we're starting to sort of recreate those systems, but in a much harder to see way, which is, I think, one of the things that makes these new tools so dangerous.
Yeah, and I want to return to that sort of a broad critique, but first let's go through the examples that you use. You start in Indiana. And like you mentioned, you basically recount the introduction of a new system that essentially governs these various benefits that folks living in poverty get from via the Indiana state government. And you look at, and before you get into the details, I mean, specifically, I want to talk maybe about the Stipes family, and you also a woman, Omega Young, but you made a decision to sort of enter into these processes sort of from the customer base rather than sort of looking at it. The perspective is from the customer base, if you will, as opposed to sort of like the managerial perspective.
Yeah, so I think it's really important, particularly just in the last sort of year or two, there's been some really incredible work that's come out that is sort of taking a second look at technological systems like machine learning, like artificial intelligence. Like, we're in the middle of like a critical reexamination. I think it's really important, this moment. But one of the things that was frustrating to me about those conversations is that we so rarely heard from the people who are most impacted by these systems. So I think of it as, we usually hear from designers, we often hear from policymakers, sometimes users in the sense of like frontline caseworkers who use the systems, but we pretty much never hear from people who see themselves as targets of these systems. And I think it's just really crucial to hear their voices, both in terms of understanding their experience and understanding their sort of analysis of what's happening, because I find they have a lot less to lose in sort of playing nice around these arguments, and they have some really compelling analyses of like what's happening in the world. And one of the stories I tell at the beginning of the book is actually about some work I did in this area a long time ago now, 20 plus years ago now. So it was probably 2000, and I was sitting in a tech lab that I had helped build with a community of women who lived in basically a single-room occupancy hotel. And I was sort of shooting the breeze with one of the women who had worked on the project with me, and we were talking about technology, and I was asking her about her electronic benefits transfer card, her EBT card, which is the sort of debit-like card you get public assistance benefits on now. And they were new at the time, and so I was asking her about them. And she said, oh, yeah, it's good in some ways. It's a little bit more convenient. Maybe there's less stigma at the grocery store. But also, my caseworker uses the sort of digital record of my purchases that it produces to track all of my movements and question all of my spending. And I must have had this like crazy, shocked, naive look on my face because she just like pointed at me and laughed for like 2 solid minutes. And then she got really serious and she was like, oh, Virginia, you guys should be paying attention to what's happening to us because they're coming for you next. And I really feel like that analysis is really spot on and like 15 years before anyone else had it. So I think there's really important reasons morally to pay attention to what the experiences are of people who are most affected by these tools. But I also just think if we want to be smart about what's going to happen in the future around these tools. We need to be looking in these communities that are seen as sort of where it's okay to experiment.
Exactly, right. And it's fascinating because I have a system with my daughter where I give her allowance on a debit card. And I see wherever she spends. I was
about to say, do you track her spending? Of course you do.
And I try to tell her, like, here, just let me give you some cash too, so that you just have this ability to go and, you know, I don't know, go to Starbucks and buy a coffee without me knowing it, or something to that effect. And it's becoming ubiquitous, I think, in many respects. But all right, let's go into this the story of Indiana. There is a $1.4 billion contract with high tech companies, and there seems to be like sort of like competing narratives going on here with this that are both like, they do this because this is a way, you know, there's the sort of the classic story of like, oh, the way we're going to deal with our school is to build more stuff because I'm friends with the guy who owns the cement company in town. And also this is a way where we can impose our biases and we can make political decisions that don't look like political decisions.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. It's one of the things that happens when we look at these tech systems. It's not that the tech systems, that their politics are necessarily better or worse than the current politics we have. It really depends on the system. I think one of the real dangers is they're like stories pretending they're not stories, or it's politics pretending it's not politics. Like, oh, this is just like an administrative change. It's just a little tweak. It's more objective. We're not making policy. But the reality is these are political decision-making machines. And I'll give you an example from Indiana. So in Indiana in 2006, then Governor Mitch Daniels contracted with IBM and ACS and a number of other companies to what they said at the time was a modernization of the public assistance eligibility programs in the state of Indiana, meaning how you applied for and were judged eligible or not eligible for public services like cash benefits or food stamps. And the system that they built, one of the sort of understandings that got built into the system was that if you at any point failed to give the system information it needed to make a determination in your case, then that was a failure to basically cooperate in establishing your eligibility for the program, which could then be used as a way to kick you off the program. Because there's this really old rule on the books that basically was there if somebody who was applying just like refused to come to meetings over and over, or was just being so difficult that you had to deny them. They basically built that rule into any kind of failure in the system was understood as this intentional failure to cooperate with establishing eligibility in the program, which was enough reason to deny you services. So, for example, Omega Young was an African-American mother of 2 grown sons. She was on Medicaid. She had, after the new system had been brought online, they moved from one-on-one meetings with caseworkers in person to meetings that were scheduled through sort of a telephone scheduling system, and that you then received a call from a call center, from a worker in a call center to do your eligibility or your recertification interview. So she was unable to make the time they picked for her. She called her county office to say, hey, I can't make that time. They somehow didn't get that message. They called her the call center called her at the set time. She wasn't there. She wasn't there to get the call. And so they checked the box that said failure to cooperate in establishing eligibility. And they denied her all of the benefits that she was already on. So Medicaid, food stamps, free transportation to medical appointments, and which put her in incredible jeopardy because the reason she missed the appointment was she was in the hospital with terminal ovarian cancer. So she was denied all the benefits that were supporting her while she was sick. She actually died on March 1st, 2009. 2 days later, there was a hearing on the denial of her benefits because she did actually appeal that decision. there was a hearing, and they recognized that it was their mistake and returned all of her benefits 2 days after she died.
And so this is I guess the in the alternate universe, the older universe, she's meeting with a caseworker. She has a direct relationship with them. They understand that she's in the hospital. This is not a time we would schedule it for. I would never cut this person off. The caseworker would react theoretically.
You would hope so, right? And certainly frontline discretion in casework has historically been a place where racial discrimination has entered the system, and also discrimination against single parents or people who are sexual minorities or migrants, like lots of places for human bias to enter the system. The reality, though, of the system in Indiana is that it denied 1 million applications in the first 3 years of this experiment, which was more than a 50% increase from the 3 years before the experiment. So that it basically, rather than shifting the way public assistance works, it just sped up sort of the worst parts of the system, which resulted in just incredible human suffering for these families.
And to what extent, I mean, when we look at something like this seems to me to be, and certainly, I have some familiar with Pence as governor in Indiana. This seems to be like mission accomplished, right? Like we were able to privatize this funding by paying these tech firms, and we were able to cull our Medicaid rolls. It's block grant. I would assume that they're working on a block grant, and we were able to cull our Medicaid rolls, and we can divert those funds where we want, et cetera, et cetera. Like this is mission accomplished.
Yeah, so I often say when I talk about the book that I don't know what was in Mitch Daniels' heart when he made the decision to sign this contract. So I can't speak directly to his intentions. But one of the folks I interviewed for the book, this Medicaid attorney in Bloomington, I think put it really well. He said, look, if we had a system that had been built to deny people on purpose, it wouldn't have worked any better than the system that we got. And so at a certain point, intentions don't really matter. What matters is the impact on people. And that's why it's sort of as the cases in the book develop, the sort of intention gets much murkier, is because I wanted to step people through this process of recognizing, like, it's not necessarily that their politicians are, misusing technology. It's that this deep social programming and the technology keeps reemerging in a way no matter what your intentions are. And that forces us to ask some really tough questions.
And what ultimately, what ultimately happened with the program?
Well, there's good news in this case, which is the people of Indiana sort of found out what was happening and just wouldn't stand for it. And so there was basically a big movement in the state of Indiana that came out of a series of town hall meetings where people who were affected came together to talk about their stories. They pushed back on the governor. He was forced to cancel this 10-year contract 3 years into the contract. And in many ways, the people of Indiana won. The sort of afterward is a bit sad, though, which is after the governor broke the contract, IBM turned around and sued the state for breach of contract. And in the first several rounds through the courts, actually won. They finally worked it out. That the damages went in the way of the state, but it wasn't much as maybe $100 million coming back to the state. They spent $500 million to deny 1 million people benefits in the long run.
Unbelievable. All right. Well, so let's move to Los Angeles, where you look at the question of housing. Where does the automation, where does the algorithm come in here?
Yes, so the system I studied in LA is a system called the Coordinated Entry System. And it's not just happening in Los Angeles. It's actually sort of standard practice just about everywhere in the United States and increasingly abroad as well. But it was really interesting to look at it in LA because Los Angeles County has one of the highest unhoused populations in the country. I think it's something like, as the last point in time count, was close to 60,000 people who are unhoused in Los Angeles County, and something like 75% of them are completely unsheltered, meaning they have no access to emergency shelter. They're just living in tents or cars or under bridges. So it's an extraordinary humanitarian crisis, the housing crisis in LA. And I looked at that system, so it's known by its proponents as the Match.com of homeless services. And the intention is quite good. The intention is to, because there are so many unhoused people in LA and so few resources, the intention is to risk rate all of the unhoused people in terms of their vulnerability to some of the worst outcomes of being homeless. And those are pretty severe. There's death and medical issues and mental health crises and community violence, all kinds of horrible things that can happen to you when you're unhoused. And then to match folks based on their vulnerability score with the most appropriate available housing resource that is out there for them. And so it's actually serving some people very, very well. So people really close to the very top of the scale basically weren't served well by the system before because they are hard to work with. And so most of the time they wouldn't get resources that caseworkers might save for slightly easier to deal with clients. People at the bottom of the scale, the least vulnerable, are actually doing pretty well because they're being matched with very time and resource limited resources like what's known as rapid rehousing. But the reality is something like 30,000 people in the middle have been surveyed by this very intrusive instrument that they use to vulnerability rank people and aren't seeing any resources at all come out of it. And I really wanted to talk to them about what their experience is. So I talked to a guy named Gary Boatwright, and he goes by the nickname Uncle Gary in Skid Row in LA. And he said he was really concerned, for example, with like where his information was going, because this survey they have to fill out asks questions like, are you currently trading sex for drugs or money? Are you thinking about hurting yourself or someone else? Is there someone out there who thinks, that you owe them money? Are there open warrants on you? And then they ask if they can take a picture, and then they ask where you can be found at different times of the day. And Uncle Gary told me, hey, it feels like I'm being asked to incriminate myself in exchange for a slightly higher lottery number for housing. And it's actually a really good analysis, because it turns out that the database that they keep this information in, it's called the Homeless Management Information Service System, HMIS, under federal data law can be accessed with no warrant, based only on an oral request by law enforcement. So there's some real issues about where this data goes, who it's shared with, and whether or not the people who are giving up their data really have a choice in whether it's really voluntary. They sign an informed consent form, but the reality is this is pretty much the only way to get into housing in Los Angeles County. So everyone's going to say yes, even if they're not comfortable with sharing such intensely personal information about themselves.
And this is another example of essentially the policing, right? I mean I think we're basically talking about policing without police.
Yeah, so that's definitely how many of the unhoused people I talked to felt about it. There were definitely folks I talked to who were like, this was a gift from God. I'm so glad it happened, because they got housed, and that's a really big deal. But a lot of the folks who had gone through the survey and had participated in the system and had received no resources at all started to sit back and sort of think, like, wait, what are they using this for, really? And I think it's a really legitimate question to ask about the system. There's no reason that law enforcement should have access to that information. No reason except for if you want to police unhoused people, if you want to be able to arrest and incarcerated unhoused people.
And are we seeing that? I mean, in this program, maybe not in LA, but in other municipalities where they're using it?
Yeah, so coordinated entry is actually pretty common across the country. It is a fairly easy fix, though. Like, we could fix the federal data rules that say that law enforcement can access the homeless management information system. We could fix that tomorrow. We could just be like, no, you can't.
Do we know that there are police departments that are accessing it and using it as a way of dealing with their homelessness problem?
So currently, I only know about Los Angeles, but currently LAPD says they do not themselves access data in HMIS, but they are legally allowed to walk into a social service center and ask caseworkers for information out of the system. Caseworkers are not required to give it to them, and I think that's really important, but they are allowed to give it to them, and many of them do. And so I would say they are accessing the system when they are looking at criminal justice cases or looking to make an arrest. They'd absolutely go into homeless shelters and ask for information out of HMIS.
And we should say that we can see what's happening with, let's say, ICE in many respects, what the implications of this are. And when, President Trump says, we're going to move into California, and he seems to have dropped this idea for the time being, but we're going to do something about the homelessness there. Yeah. That would be the mechanism they would use.
Yeah, I think actually, I'm so glad you brought that up, because I think when we have this conversation about intention, one of the things that's really important is to understand that these systems will work no matter what the intention is. So the best example, I think, is actually the DACA database, the Deferred Action on Childhood Arrival database, right? So under an Obama administration, the idea was to collect names of people to protect them from deportation. But when the administration changed, all of a sudden there's a database of 800,000 undocumented people that are in the hands of an executive with a very different idea about what to do with that information. And so one of the things that I think a lot about when I think about solutions is having kind of a what Dana Boyd would call like a hacker mindset, which is like, think first, how do I break this system? Not like how is it going to work if everybody's like holding hands and singing Kumbaya and all have the same idea about what's best, but like how do I use this against its intention? And if you can do that, like don't do it. Like how do we harden these systems against uses that even the designers would find deplorable? Because once it's out there, it's out there.
Right. What do you do if Donald Trump is running it? Essentially, exactly. I mean, that's basically. Yeah. All right. Well, lastly, let's talk about briefly the Allegheny County. You went to Allegheny County in Pennsylvania, and there's a system that flags for potential neglect, abuse of children. What was problematic about that system?
Well, so the system's called the Allegheny Family Screening Tool, and it's supposed to be able to predict which children might be victims of abuse or neglect in the future. And I think everybody would agree, actually, that's a really important question. And so it really felt like the stakes of this were incredibly high, both in terms of protecting children and in terms of keeping families intact and healthy. So this is a system that is built on top of a data warehouse that the county built back in 1999 that collects information from like 29 different county and state programs. So like adult and juvenile probation, the housing authority, drug and alcohol services, the police department, office of mental health, a bunch of other things, school districts, for example. And then on top of that data, they hired a team of economists and computer scientists from New Zealand and also the U.S. to design a system that could red flag who they think are the most vulnerable, the riskiest families in terms of potential future abuse or neglect. The problem, though, is it basically comes up on like a thermometer, sort of green on the bottom and red on the top. And if your score is in the red, if it's high enough on a 0 to 20 scale, they actually automatically open an investigation on your family so that it refers your family for investigation unless it's overridden by a supervisor. The problem, though, is that it doesn't actually model child maltreatment because we have actually very limited data on children who are actually physically, emotionally, or sexually abused. What it does, and not enough information to basically build a viable model, so it uses proxies which basically just means sort of a stand-in for actual neglect or abuse. And originally, one of the proxies it used was called call re-referral. And basically all that means is a call has been placed on a child to sort of a hotline. It's screened out by their call screeners as not sort of crucial enough to step in or as not actually abuse and neglect. And then there's a second call placed on the same child within 2 years. And that seems reasonable, except that it's really open information in most poor working class neighborhoods, most neighborhoods that are affected by child protective services, that vendetta calling happens a lot. So like a neighbor has a party and you're pissed, you call Child Protective Services. You're breaking up with somebody and it's not going well, you call Child Protective Services. Like sometimes children call Child Protective Services on their parents to like exert some control in their family.
Divorce, so, I would imagine, too. Is also.
Divorce all the time, absolutely. And so the fact that they thought this might be an appropriate stand-in for abuse or neglect actually occurring is actually incredibly troubling, because it says that these data scientists and economists actually don't know a lot about the system that they're trying to model, so they're modeling the wrong things. And that gets those choices are made invisible when all call screeners are seeing is this thermometer that says, 17 out of 20.
Right.
Like it's out of your hands. We're just opening an investigation. Like that doesn't show up. So again, it's a way that we hide these actually political decisions behind the sort of math-washed facade of like clean, objective numbers.
And the lack of sort of like ongoing contact, right? That would make these. It's really the lack of discretion in these contexts, or is it? I mean, so just to broaden out the discussion as we start to wrap up here a little bit. It seems there's like a multitude of problems with these things that range from the assumptions that people make at the beginning that are both political and just sort of, I guess, maybe detached, right? I mean, like there's a quality to that Allegheny system, which is sort of indicative of like maybe some elements of education reform, where it's, we're doing this based on data and we don't have any real world educational experience. And so we just, I guess, apply a metrics that don't really have anything to do with this. I mean, so there's multiple different levels, it seems to me, that this can go wrong. How do you fix it, or can you? Like, I mean, is it possible to rely on technology to do these things without it obscuring the problems?
Yeah, so I think one of the big points that I want people to take away from the book is that we often sort of talk about these systems as disruptors or as equalizers even, right? Like this is evidence-based policymaking. This is more objective. This is removing human discretion. But in the cases that I look at in public services, the reality is they act much more like intensifiers or amplifiers of the systems we already have in place. And so changing the way these technologies operate is not as easy as, having better intentions at the beginning, or even, training computer engineers to understand more about sort of social inequality. But it's going to require really deep cultural and political change. But in the meantime, we need to create systems that do less harm, or we need to give people people in communities to give the ability to have the ability to say no to things that don't fit their community values. So it feels like rather than trying to go the route of taking all of our values out of these technologies, which just means you're building them for the status quo, what we need to do is actually build them with our values front and center. Unfortunately, right now, by default, we're building these systems with only values like efficiency and cost savings. But we should be building them from the point of view of equity, justice, and fairness, and human dignity and self-determination. So you get a really different system if you design from the principle that public services actually should be a floor under everyone. That is a human rights approach that says no one is allowed to, have their family broken up because a parent couldn't afford a child's medication, or like allow someone like Gary Boatwright to live in a tent on the street in Los Angeles for 2 decades. At any point, we can say that's unacceptable. But the reality is these tools just reproduce this idea of the moral thermometer, right? They just say we're coming at this from a triage approach, which says there's not enough resources for everyone. We have to decide who really deserves them. When in reality, the most complicated math is what activist Sherry Honkala calls the belly button algorithm, which is like, who deserves housing? Do you have a belly button? Then you deserve housing.
Right.
Who deserves food? Do you have a belly button? Right. So the reality is, I believe we're using these systems as a kind of empathy override, right? They allow us to think the most horrifying situations are getting corrected, but everybody else maybe kind of deserves it. And maybe they should go to jail, or maybe they should lose their kids. And the reality is, no one should go to jail for being poor, and no one should lose their kids for being poor. And that's the basic assumption we have to make when we build programs or these digital tools.
I mean, I guess these tools, they both function to obscure the values that are inputted into them, but they also, I guess, your book helps put them in stark relief, and certainly is an argument, like you say, for something like the belly button rule, where maybe we don't need a process to determine who is eligible for this. Maybe we should just provide enough that making that process obsolete on some level, so that everybody's eligible, and we just put our resources into that.
Yeah, I think we all deserve better. That's why I wrote the book.
It's a fascinating piece of work. Virginia Eubanks, the book is Automating Inequality, How High-Tech Profile, Police, and Punish the Poor. We will put a link to that at majority.fm. Thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for the conversation.
I've been advocating the belly button rule for over 40 years. And some of us have followed suit. Some of us thought that there should be a testing mechanism to see how your belly button, how much lint was in it before you got health care. That's not what I believe in.
Testing as to whether or not you have an innie or an outie.
Do you have an innie? Do you have an outie?
How does it look at the
pool? Does it have a weird one? Is it twistable?
We need to spread the lint around.
Whether or not it's a disgusting belly button or a normal one, you should be able to have health care, in my opinion.
All right, folks, we're going to go to the fun half, going to touch a little bit on, well, obviously this great Bernie rally, Mike Pompeo having a little bit of a tantrum. What kind of energy did you say he brought, Brendan?
Big Paul Manafort type energy.
Some Paul Manafort type energy. I used to think, I don't know, Pompeo's such a bag of shit. He's so disgusting. Jesus Christ, I don't even want to contemplate what that guy's belly button is like. Yuck.
But housing, healthcare.
Housing, Mike Pompeo deserves housing and healthcare. And, I mean, there could be some parameters around the housing and healthcare that he deserves. Speaking of which, I would like to acknowledge that I was the one of the ringleaders of the "Lock Him Up" chant at the Bernie rally.
I heard that
was
chant.
me. That was me. I was
very proud of you.
I was trying to get that started for a long time, and then finally, when the mayor of San Juan was talking about Trump in Puerto Rico, it broke out.
Oh, yeah. There were some real energetic folks near me, too, like just yelling all sorts of nice heckles. It was great.
Lock him up. Lock him up. But, of course, it's like, no, vote him out. Come on. We need that libidinal energy. And incidentally, like, literally, dude should probably be locked up.
Oh, yeah.
Like, if we're going to lock people up,
if we're going to have prisons, we should definitely put Donald Trump in one.
Oh, I would be actually, it would be even more funny to send him to some type of like enlightened Swedish prison where he had to take like emotional enrichment courses and had like mandated watercoloring. And like, no, stop. I don't want to introspect. Okay. Today's show is brought to you by Proactiv, introducing Proactiv's next generation acne treatment system. Proactiv MD, which contains an innovative dermatologist-recommended topical retinoid called adapalene. Right now, our listeners can go to proactiv.com/majority to receive an exclusive on-the-go bag, which features Proactiv's T-Zone Oil Absorber, Body Acne Wipes, and Green Tea Moisturizer that's close to $100 value. And there's a 60-day money-back guarantee. And again, that's proactiv.com/majority, proactiv.com/majority, in order to get clean skin for the win. All right, folks. Of course, become a member of the Majority Report. That's how this ship sails. That's how we give you unbossed news. Do you see? On Tuesdays, TMBS last week, we had a couple of great guests, as we always do. And tomorrow, joining us are John Idarola and Artesia Balthrop. I will say some very big league upcoming guests. And the first one I will tell you about is the long-awaited return of Adolph Reed, which I'm incredibly excited about. Get your tickets to the TMB. And also I'll say, because I've said this before, Abby Martin, very excited to have her on. Check out her Gaza Fights for Freedom documentary. Could not be more important. The humanity of Palestinian people subjugated in a pretty unparalleled way in the modern world. It's horrifying and necessary to understand that issue and center it. Patreon.com/TMBS. That's how you get the whole show. We have 83,000 subs on YouTube, and we want to get to 100,000 as quickly as possible. Helps us spread the word of what we're doing. So Michael Brooks Show on YouTube. We are well over halfway sold out with we're still over 4 weeks left to go before the Philly live show. So I'd snag your ticket. World Cafe, November 23rd. Artesia Balthrop, Crystal Ball, Emma Vigeland. World Cafe, link in the show description. No age limits on this one, folks. So people who weren't 21 who wanted to come to the other shows, come along. Bring your folks with you. We'll see you. Jamie.
So this week on the Antifada, Andy and I discussed the extremely on-brand day that we had as Goth Socialists, in which we went to the Bernie rally and then we saw the Misfits at night. It's pretty cool. We had on two guests this week. We had on our friend Sham Khanna, the editor of Commune magazine, to talk about what's in the new issue of Commune. And we had on Josh Strawn of the duo Azerswan to talk a little bit of spooky music and punk music and generally good music, because, October is a very important month for Goth Socialists. There's also a bit of a tie-in there.
Wait, what happened with... Oh, I'm sorry. Dumb question. Halloween.
There's also...
I thought there was going to be like some hidden history that I was going to learn about. Okay.
Respect
Halloween.
my culture.
I was actually trying to really respect your culture. I thought I was going to learn something.
Oh, well, you will. If you listen to the episode, you'll learn about all kinds of spooky music of my people. But yes, there's also a tie-in because I am throwing a benefit show on Friday at Transpecos in Brooklyn. This coming Friday. It's a resurrection of my Halloween party, Death Rites, that I didn't do last year, but I did for like 7 years before that. And it's going to be raising money for El Comedor, which is a mutual aid kitchen in Tijuana that helps migrants stay alive while they're trying to get into the U.S. and going through all the horrible shit that they put people through when they're in that situation. Andy actually did some interviews with people there from the migrant caravan and people who were working to run it a while back that ran on my show. So ever since then, I've felt a connection with them and wanted to do something for them. So I am. And it's going to be super fun and super freaky and super goth. And Azerswan is the headliner and their new album is very good. I've heard it. So if you want to come get freaky for good cause, come to Transpecos on Friday.
That's awesome. Of course, Matt Leck does a great podcast called Literary Hangover. Expand your horizons. Get literary. Check out Literary Hangover. Brendan is working on you called it the New York Jets meets a fish show.
Yeah,
podcast.
that's gonna be definitely real and happen at some point in the future. No, I got something cooking up. You guys might just hear about it.
I'm excited. Can you give me, is it writing or podcast? Can you give me a hint?
It would be a podcast, yeah.
Awesome.
Ooh.
I'm gonna light a little fire under myself now. Matt took up a big swath of what I would consider doing a podcast in, but I'm not gonna let that that cornering stop me.
You got your own voice. You tell it.
Everybody's unique in a certain sense. We'll see you on the fun half.
Left is best. Jamie and I may have a disagreement.
Yeah, you can't just say whatever you want about people just because you're rich.
I have an absolute right to mock them on YouTube.
He's up there buggy whipping like he's the boss.
I am not your employer.
You know, I'm tired of the negativity.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you. You're nervous? You're a little bit upset? You're riled up?
Yeah, maybe you should rethink your defense of that, you fucking idiots.
We're just going to get rid of you.
All right.
But dude, you want to smoke this joint?
Yes.
Do you feel like you are a dinosaur?
That's a good shit.
Exactly. I'm happy now.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win.
Oh, hell yeah.
Now listen to me. 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 847-906-501-457-238. 56, 27, 1/2, 5 eighths, 3.9 billion.
Wow.
He's the ultimate math nerd.
Don't you see?
Why don't you get a real job instead of spewing vitriol and hatred, you left-wing Limbaugh?
Everybody's taking their dumb juice today.
Come on, Sammy.
Dance, dance, dance.
Grandpa.
I had my first post-coital scene with a woman. I'm hoping to add more moves to my repertoire. All I have is the dip and the swirl.
Fine, we can double dip.
Yes, this is a perfect moment.
No.
Wait, what?
You make under $1 million a year. You're scum. You're nothing.
Excuse me? Fuck you, you fucking liberal elite. I think you belong in jail.
Thank you for saying that, Sam. You're a horrible, despicable person.
All right, gonna take a quick break. I want to take a moment to talk to some of the libertarians out there. Take whatever vehicle you want to drive to the library. What you're talking about is jibber jabber.
Classic. I'm feeling more chill already.
Good. Donald Trump can kiss all of our asses.
Hey, Sam. Hey, Andy. You guys ready to do some evil?
Hitler was such an idiot.
I think I might be a Nazi.
Agreed.
No.
Death to America.
You.
Yes.
Wow.
Wow, that's weird. No way! Unbelievable. This guy's got a really good hook. Throw our hands up.
Ooh.
Wow.
But Sam, I gotta get off.
No worries. Let's. I want to just flesh this out a little bit. I mean, look, it's a free speech issue. If you don't like me,
Hey, shut up! Thank you for calling into the Majority Report. Sam will be with you shortly.
Welcome back to the fun half. Lula Livre, everybody. Michael Brooks here, along with James Peck, Brent Finn. That's how they'd say it on Fox and Friends, right? Or AM Drive Time too. But sometimes that's what Ducey does. He goes, "Brent, come in."
Let us be your AM drive time.
It's like, so welcome back, everybody.
We're West Coast AM drive time, I guess. Almost.
Welcome back.
If you listen to it in the morning, then we can be morning drive time for anywhere.
Like traffic looking a little stuck at the Golden Gate Bridge because of all of the Google buses that should be burned, folks. All right. Satire. All right, folks. Let's actually get to it. I was incredibly inspired by the Bernie rally, of course, other than the incredible missed opportunity of not taking Bernie out to one mic, which, you know, I mean, there should have been at least one Nas reference. You were literally right by, you know, you were in the heart of that creative emergence. The visual is extraordinary, actually. You're at a park where you have I believe it's the largest public housing in New York City, which of course is the victim of NYCHA and underinvestment and all of the things that we talk about, of which Bernie's housing plan would radically address in a completely unprecedented way in modern politics. Then you look across the bridge and you see the core of the problem, Wall Street. Then you look straight ahead behind the stage and there is a power plant. Like right there. I mean, it was so right there that the first time I ever was in Queensbridge, I knew the power plant existed. But in my just naivete, I remember asking a friend, I was like, is that it? Like this giant monstrosity that looks so obvious of what this is, of the racism, the class dimensions, the centers and peripheries that it represents. Like, oh yeah, no, that big thing. Yes, that's right there. This thing that hovers over this neighborhood of all of these families. Yep, that's it.
It's almost a little on the nose.
It was quite on the nose. So it was a very powerful visual of everything that is represented really by modern capitalism and all of the things that, that are so basic and so fundamental that Sanders has been fighting for decades, including at a time when, and AOC, I'm really glad that she made this point, that being inside the halls of Congress is no joke, in her words. And she noted the pressure that comes from every single sector in every single way, and then correctly identified the fact that this guy held the flame for decades, when now we've got people copying Bernie and trying to co-opt the message. We'll get to Nina Turner in a second. But it was, this is really even the difference between being in your 30s and like even your late 20s versus being, a Zoomer or whatever we're calling it. Like, calling for national health care was considered weird, extreme, and eccentric through 2016. When Sanders put it on the table. And there are these sparks and shoots. Occupy Wall Street, Fight for 15, Black Lives Matter, Kshama Sawant getting elected to the city council in Seattle, and Amazon is dumping an insane amount of money to try to get her out. So we need to have solidarity and fight for her. That's an incredibly important leader there in Sawant. So let's play actually these two clips from AOC. Let's start with number 3, because I think that this really distills what I'm talking about, and I'm so glad she highlighted it. This is significant. AOC, Ilhan Omar, and almost certainly Rashida Tlaib, I'm sure she's going to be endorsing Sanders too, they're really showing that they are here for this. This isn't branding. It isn't politics as aesthetics. It isn't a shift in priorities once you get a position of power. It is, we are of a movement, we're of a mission, and we're going to take the serious political and media risk and dissatisfy a lot of people who, frankly, are fundamentally disrespectful of AOC and Ilhan Omar because they know nothing of their politics and what drives them. We're going to dissatisfy them, and we're going to stay committed to our mission. This is AOC.
It's not just about standing up and saying these things, but behind closed doors, your arm is twisted, the vice pressure of political pressure gets put on you, and every trick in the book, psychological and otherwise, is used to get us to abandon the working class. And it has been in that experience over the last 9 months that I have grown to appreciate the enormous, consistent, and nonstop advocacy of Senator Bernie Sanders.
There's a great clip of a former Republican Congressman, Bob Ney, who in 2016, he was like, look, I worked with Bernie, I think it was on Veterans Affairs, and he was like, this guy was amazing. Like, no one had the consistency of purpose or delivery for people. And he said one day Bernie came in, asked him to do something to help veterans with him. And Ney said, that sounds good. I'll co-sponsor. Bernie said, no, you should take the lead on this. This isn't about priority of authorship. We need to get this done. You combine that with everything from fighting the forces of modern neoliberalism for decades as a mayor, as a congressman, as a senator, even down to the erasure and contempt that just this entire disgusting media class has for him. I mean, I think he enjoys it on some level. I do think there's like a genuine FDR, like, of course, if you're, some schmuck who doesn't care about working people on CNN, fine. But that would take a psychological toll on anybody. And it takes an enormous amount of commitment, an enormous amount of bigger vision to keep showing up and up and up and up and up and up. And he's the one who needs to do it right now. Look, can anybody doubt for a second? Like, let's be real for 2 seconds. If Bernie was 10 years younger and AOC was 10 years older, he would be backing her for president. He's a mission-driven person. Yeah. And now is when he is in the position, he's the leader, he's the candidate. That just is the historical circumstance because he's the guy who held the flame for all these decades. We miss generations of leadership. AOC is only 30 years old. Ilhan Omar is in her 30s. Rashida Tlaib is in her 30s. You miss generations for this actual commitment, not third way stuff, not, technocratic progressive tinkering, but structural reform. Let's take a look at AOC acknowledging that mass mobilization is the only way to even have a prayer of achieving these things.
Now, one thing I'll say is that it's not just what we're fighting for, but it's how we're going to do it. And how we're going to do it is with a mass mobilization of working class people at the ballot box. That's the only way that we are going to win this thing. Because one of our top priorities is not just defeating Donald Trump, but defeating the systems of which he is a symptom.
Of which he is a symptom that we cut out before that. Well, of course, she's absolutely right. And now AOC elevated, and you need that. We'll get to Bernie, who actually I was incredibly moving the way Bernie closed his speech. Nina Turner might be the most effective political communicator in America.
She was good.
She's always good. And how triggered she makes whiny people who don't appreciate like that this is a campaign. And in a campaign, you draw distinctions, even amongst people that you're friends with. It's called a campaign. We're not, I don't know what people think we're doing. We're not playing foosball together, though even in foosball, you still compete. But the reason that there's this triggering, though, I think is definitely a testament to her power. She has an unparalleled clarity. She has an unparalleled sense of purpose. And she is bringing it in a real, direct, morally inspiring way. And it's actually that fusion of here is an absolutely real, down-to-earth, no BS person who has basically off-the-charts oratory skills and charisma that, I'll put it in my terms. She reminds me of this guy. And of President Lula.
Major compliment coming from Michael.
Basically the highest compliment I could give somebody. The Lula of Cleveland, Nina Turner, making some basic distinctions that, again, this is the truth. Don't freak out about it. Either have an answer or absorb it. But these are real things.
We got a lot of copies. There's only one candidate in 2016 who told the multi-millionaires and billionaires in this country, keep your money, I'll raise my money with the people. There's only one candidate who's been marching with the working class people, not because he's running for president, but because it's right. Hello, Marriott workers. Hello, Amazon workers. Hello, Verizon workers. Hello, teachers. Come on, somebody. And I don't know about you, but I hail from a tradition that says that you will know the tree by the fruit that it bears, and Senator Bernie Sanders bears good fruit. So there are many copies. People want to talk about a framework. People who stand up in other folks' living rooms and say to them, multi-millionaires and billionaires, and nothing will fundamentally change for you. Well, Queens, I got a message. If nothing fundamentally changes for multi-millionaires and billionaires, then nothing fundamentally changes for you and you and you and you.
That's exactly right. She also talked about why did somebody vote 3 times to give Donald Trump the military budget he wants? This stuff matters. It matters domestically, and my God, does it matter internationally. And I'm only going to talk about that more. There's a reason why the report in Politico came out several months ago that leaders from Bolivia to Spain, from the UK, and across the globe of everybody they could talk to were excited about Bernie Sanders because in him, when he calls for freeing Lula, when he calls out the military-industrial complex, as he did the prison-industrial complex, when he talks about cutting defense spending, when he is the only candidate to say, we will cut aid to Israel, not if they formalize what they're already doing in some distant future scenario, but we recognize today that the policy towards Palestinians is in a daily dehumanization, a daily abuse, a daily act of apartheid and murder in Gaza. The only person treading this water is Bernie Sanders, and Nina Turner told it as it was.
Oh, she's so great. She's like one of the most politically talented speakers I think I've ever seen. Also, I love how all those people on Donut Twitter are like so terrible to her. It reminds me of that McSweeney's headline. I support strong women of color unless they are politically to my left.
I mean, that's it. There's literally nothing more than that. And, you know, it's like in left anti-racist politics, you have fundamental, as Adolph Reed said, it's constituent parts of a struggle. And then you also have a basis upon which you recognize that there's a huge diversity of political opinion within different communities, and you understand people as peers and colleagues, not two totemic symbols to validate your view or to be discarded if they don't. And that's all these people do. And I mean, now they have to do it with the squad, which is really more awkward, but they've done it with Nina Turner from the beginning. And
yeah, like Donut Twitter is literally named after their like shitty meme that they did about her.
She's a fantastic leader. She deserves our respect.
And she did a really good job tying economic issues to racial justice. And I think Bernie did too, actually.
They all did. It's there. I mean, again, you know, this is the point now where it's like you got to just be watching. I mean, AOC literally said imperialism, colonialism. And I've had critiques of AOC on foreign policy specifically. And that's an example of what I mean. I'll provide the critique when it's there. If she keeps moving in that direction, then I won't be leveling the same critique because she will have adjusted her positioning. So you got to watch what they're actually saying. Bernie closed this, I think, in a very powerful way. With a message of solidarity and compassion.
Are you willing to fight for that person who you don't even know as much as you're willing to fight for yourself? Are you willing to stand together and fight for those people who are struggling economically in this country? Are you willing to fight for young people drowning in student debt, even if you are not? Are you willing to fight to ensure that every American has health care as a human right, even if you have good health care? Are you willing to fight for frightened immigrant neighbors, even if you are native born? Are you willing to fight for a future for generations of people who have not yet even been born, but are entitled to live on a planet that is healthy and habitable? Because if you are willing to do that, if you are willing to love, if you are willing to fight for a government of compassion and justice and decency, if you are willing to stand up to Trump's desire to divide us up, if you are prepared to stand up to the greed and corruption of the corporate elite, if you and millions of others are prepared to do that, there is no doubt in my mind that not only will we win this election, but together we will transform this country. Thank you all very much.
By the way, looking very good. Guys looked very good since his heart attack. It's almost bizarre.
He looked great. He looked the same as usual, which is to say, great.
But I feel like he actually has dropped a few pounds, and his face looks like, I don't know, he looks a little leaner, a little bit less red, a little bit. He needs to get that rest. Bernie, you work your ass off. Everybody needs their rest. He's working twice as hard as people half his age. He needs to get a little sleep.
Yeah, no, he puts the rest of us to shame. I wish I had half as much energy as Bernie Sanders. Jesus Christ.
Seriously.
Like, insane. I get tired from doing this part-time job.
Yeah, and I remember after the heart attack happened and they were saying that he was scaling back his, ground operations a little bit. They made it sound, certain outlets made it sound like, oh, he's not going to do anything. And then, on the ground reporters were like, no, he's doing more than everyone already.
Yeah, that's right. Like, he's going to do like 3 major rallies a day instead of 5.
Yeah.
And still fight to end the genocide in Yemen. All right, let's do this. And there was at least one reporter speaking on MSNBC who at least had some anecdotal reality to share with MSNBC in a slight interruption from their relentless erasure of Bernie Sanders. It's going to be tricky now because I think some folks on MSNBC want the AOC brands, but they don't want the AOC politics. Read Bhaskar Sunkara. If you like AOC, you should like Bernie Sanders. It's not that complicated. All right, let's check this out.
Ray, your thoughts on the AOC endorsement, Bernie Sanders? You said you had some news to share about that.
Well, no, not so much news, but I mean, I just checked in with a couple of Latino supporters for Bernie Sanders who actually turned away from Bernie Sanders and who were with Castro. And so I did a little check-in. So how does AOC endorsing Bernie, how does that impact? I wasn't expecting them to say that it was going to move them. Surprisingly, they said, to me, surprisingly, because I felt that this was a very political move, but they were like, you know what, AOC, we follow her. If this is happening, if she's backing Bernie, it may impact what I decide to do in the primaries. So not necessarily good for Julian Castro, but really good for Bernie Sanders.
And we'll see how it plays out with voters in the coming months.
I mean, what's funny is that there's 2 ways of looking at the politics of AOC's move. So one, yes, from the perspective of her base and the movement, it would have been a disaster for her to not endorse Bernie Sanders. That's always been my position. Disastrous.
Yeah, like, who's knocking on doors for her?
Absolutely. For people who have powered her and gotten her into office and what she emerges from, that's Sanders, no doubt. And she understands that, obviously. And she not only understands that, I mean, she's proving again and again that she is of that,
and
right?
She said as much in her speech as well, where she was like, I don't think my campaign's happening if Bernie Sanders doesn't happen in 2016.
There's no question that, I mean, any
people
number
forget
of
that
people forget
when they
that.
make these calculations.
Well, they forget that and they erase that. And then there's a bubble DC conversation where, yes, I have no doubt that that this reasserts that she isn't playing nice with the powers that be in the Democratic Party, that she's going to get a lot of trashing and a lot of whining from a lot of different pundits and think tank people and so on. So in that sense, it absolutely is a risk. And it's certainly, it's significant that she's done it while, Bernie has faced some stumbles. So I think it's both. It's politically necessary in the context of what powered her to endorse Bernie. And frankly, from my view, just bluntly, like, all of them should have been on stage with him at the announcement. I mean, there was no reason to even play around with this. I mean, this election is so clear in terms of the stakes and the choice. But I think that from the perspective that you hear on MSNBC, this is a big risk. And it's funny because they're half right, because it is a risk, because it offends power brokers. And on the other hand, it just shows again that so many people who comment on politics in this country have no connection to politics. I mean, it's extraordinary. It's like, oh, no, I thought, AOC was going to sign with a different franchise. No, AOC has democratic socialist politics, as does Bernie Sanders. There's no other candidate that has that politics. Ilhan Omar has articulated the need for a multiracial working class coalition to overcome structural inequity in this country better than anybody else in modern politics, with the exception of Bernie Sanders at his best. So she's endorsing the candidate who's done that. I mean, guys, it's not that hard to figure out, but it really shows you they talk politics is Insta and sports. I mean, this is like the clearest conflict of politics as a spectator sport entertainment process and politics as an actual movement that does things. And that's what AOC and Ilhan are of.
Yeah, I mean, it's nice to see them building out a progressive or social democratic wing of the Democratic Party, which hopefully soon will be larger than it is right now.
Absolutely.
And hopefully they'll be able to achieve at least some of their goals.
Absolutely. All right. Let us take a call or two. If you couldn't go there, I would just watch the rally on the Bernie YouTube channel. You're calling from a 475 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
What's up, guys? Luke from Connecticut.
Hey, Luke. What's going on? What's on your mind?
I was at the rally. I had my eyes peeled for you guys, and I missed you, so I was super bummed out about that.
Oh, by the way, to everybody that I met at the rally, and I'm sure Jamie Rand's plenty of people too, thank you. Awesome to see you guys. Still very much getting used to the idea of people recognizing me in different places. But I'm honored.
Yeah, and don't be scared to say hi. I got some tweets from people who are too scared to say hi. I'm like, I don't bite. Also, I have stickers, and I'll give them to you.
As long as you just avoid eye contact, it's cool. I'm happy to say hi.
Yeah,
just
I'll
don't
look at the ground. I'll definitely look at the ground if I see you.
Yeah, eyes to the ground.
I won't be scared, and I'm coming for those stickers.
What's on your mind, man?
I wanted, if you guys were just mentioning Nina, and if we don't make a T-shirt that says #Come on somebody, then we have no right living in this country. That's a gold mine right there.
I agree.
Come on somebody.
That was what was so satisfying about that is it was like that's what an amazing political oratory is, right? Like I've been saying that in a less good way for months. Like what the fuck is going on here? Like it's like, yeah, come on somebody. Like people have been asking if they claim to be on the left for this policy set for decades. And now all of a sudden somebody who's not, 2% in the polls is putting it on the table. And he's been fighting for it in an unparalleled way for 40 years. Come on, somebody. Absolutely.
Yeah, and it's pulling teeth.
Yeah. I agree with you.
Anyway, guys, I love what you do. I got to run. I'm on break from work. I just wanted to let you guys know that I was looking for you, didn't see you. By the time I left, I felt like I was on like a meth bender. It was like, the energy was crazy. Bender.
Okay.
But
maybe a little more
positive. This is your brain on Bernie.
Maybe a little bit more positive.
All right. I don't know. A Molly bender. If that's
okay, yeah, I could see that.
If you love the person next to you and you feel connected with them spiritually and materially.
Yeah, it was kind of like
give them a cuddle.
Give them a cuddle.
Hand them a piece of candy.
Even if your mouth isn't dry, will you give the person next to you a lollipop?
Maybe a glass of water.
Maybe you're coming down, but maybe you'll hand them a slice of orange or something else.
All right,
it was so plur.
Thanks, man. Take care.
Bernie is plur.
Bernie's amazing.
Peace, love, unity, and respect.
You are calling from a 215 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hello, am I on right now?
Yes, you are. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Hi, my name is Biannual James. I'm calling from Cobb County, Georgia.
Hey.
I wanted to just give a quick shout out to Michael Owens. He is a leading progressive candidate. running for my district, District 13 in Georgia. He's fought to flip 14 seats here in Georgia. He's also fought to organize for Lucy Macbeth and Stacey Abrams. He wants to have a $15 minimum wage, a Green New Deal, and Medicare for all, not Pete Buttigieg's Medicare for all who wanted in that nonsense. So I urge Georgians who are listening to get out and vote, and for viewers to support Michael Owens. One of his opponents is a conservative, and during a forum on Saturday to an audience of predominantly black people, including myself, this guy said that blacks in these poor areas were most likely poor because they like to rely on government and they don't like business. He said that we've already tried reparations under the Lyndon B. Johnson administration. When he tried to do the war on poverty.
Who is this person?
He said that, I forget his name. I think it's John something.
I think we're going to need to find who this guy is at some point.
Some Mayo ass.
Yeah.
He said this, right? And then he said that he wants to propose a plan where we work with the State Department. It's a volunteer program for blacks who are poor to be able to get repatriated back to Africa with small loans to start small businesses. Because if they haven't figured out, and he said assimilate, if they haven't figured out how to assimilate into the American economy, maybe they could do it better in a culture they could understand. Absolutely disgusting.
Wow.
Wait, what? I'm shocked that hasn't been picked up. That's fucking unbelievable.
Is his opponent Steve King? That's full on race science.
Exactly. I confronted this man afterwards, and I told him, for one thing, I told this man, you're a politician. One, you got to play to the room, and you're in a room full of black people. It's probably not smart to tell us we need to go back to Africa and that we don't like business. For one thing, my mom runs a firm, so let's just get that out of the way. Two, let me just say this to you. You do know that in this country, when we work together, we get good things done. And he said, well, I don't know. Well, let me just tell you this. He brought up the classic Benjamin Franklin line. He said that Benjamin Franklin liked free enterprise. And I told him, well, Benjamin Franklin also liked to tax people and spend that money on public schools and on public libraries, because an educated America is a prosperous America.
That's right.
Therefore, therefore, like how you were riffing on Medicare for all, and you said it wouldn't work. If we tax people to pay for Medicare for all, we will have a healthier society. Therefore, we will have a healthier America, and we must stop this man. So, I would like to say
who is he? What seat again is this person that you just talked about
this
running
is
for?
District Michael Owens, Dr. Michael Owens. He's running for District 13 here in Georgia
for state
his
Senate,
website
state
is
rep.
OwensForCongress.com.
For Congress,
not state rep,
for United States Congress. Okay, an opponent running for the United States Congress said that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we need to find out who that person is. We're going to really need to find out who that person is. So could somebody please...
Is this someone running in the primary on the Republican side?
Yeah, he's running in the primary on the Republican side.
Okay.
Can someone please tweet out the name of that particular person? Because I think that's something that we're going to need to keep track of.
And before I get off, because I do want to close, I don't want to take too much of your time. You guys are totally right. Politics is not about spectacle. Politics is about power, and I told this man, politics is about power. Either we use the resources of the state for the many, or we use it for the few.
Absolutely.
And I'll just close on that.
I appreciate
thank you guys,
that.
and I love you guys. You guys are amazing, and keep up the great work.
All right. Thank you so much.
you.
I appreciate that.
Let's do some research into this
I was a
guy.
little, I'm sorry. It's mask off time. I shouldn't be so thrown.
I feel like the Southern Poverty Law Center probably knows who he is already.
Jesus Christ.
There's no Republican challengers or primary candidates declared in this district, which is
I guess
D plus 20, by the way. So, I think the guy who it is was maybe just trying to be a dickhead.
Clearly. Queensbridge Park was a great choice for the rally. I know the area very well. My studio is just a few blocks from there. Saw Michael briefly in the park. Sorry I didn't make it to the mural. Are you willing to fight? Absolutely. Absolutely. And yes, the mural, I've been there. Warren's rolling out her plan soon to pay for Medicare for all. Her plan for mental health care on her site not only leaves mental health care to the private insurance companies, it seems to assume a pretty big role for them. In contrast, Bernie's Medicare for all includes mental health along with dental vision as necessarily covered. Pretty big distinction. Yeah.
It blows my mind that you would leave any part of healthcare out of your healthcare plan, right?
I mean, also, I would just say, like, you know, I know people will go easy when it's rolled out, but this is the same dynamic with Harris. Like, there is a Medicare for all plan. Do you support it or not? Sorry. I mean, I don't know. I mean, the reason I get so frustrated about this is because it really, like, it, first of all, it, like, actually does matter. I could tell you that, like, as somebody who's been without health care for years of my life, who knows people who struggle with this type of thing, who, like, this isn't a joke. You need to actually take care of it in a full and comprehensive way. And also that even on the complete opposite end, even the Biden plan, which is really, like, that's what Buttigieg's plan is. And Biden's plan actually, like, relative to 08 Obama, is quite to the left. It's a robust public option, introduces new regulations and subsidies. That bill, as things stand now, would never pass Congress, right? Like, the only way, this language of, like, movement and mobilization is literally the only option that is left for achieving anything. Might as well go for comprehensive answers to that. I'm very wary because, in my view, she's equivocated on this issue, and I don't see why you need to. I mean, there are two bills. There's the Jayapal bill, there's the Sanders bill. They nail it. And, you know, if you want to unwind some type of, like, French style option, as I said before, that will require even more money and even more quote unquote taxes. And you know, it's funny. I like that Warren's been pushing back against these stupid tax questions, and I'm with her on it in terms of it's a question of cost, not taxes. And that's what I used to say that Sanders should say. And people push back against me. And I've actually become convinced, because the truth is like, you have to just immediately acknowledge the truth and then make the bigger point. I think getting into endless games about it, you can always push back and say, as she does, which is correct, this is basically a stupid question distracting from the bigger point. But to just have multiple sound bites where you can't just say that word and acknowledge the obvious looks very political. And I don't think is effective messaging
and then
at all.
Disingenuous people like Buttigieg can make it about that. Like, oh, why won't you answer the question? Like, Bernie gets right out in front of it. He explains it very clearly, and it's done.
And Buttigieg is getting mileage off of that. I have no doubt that, you know, he's picking up votes from Warren because he shares that wealth pool with her. All right, let's do a second of this. I literally couldn't sit through this debate, but I know many of you would enjoy this. I can't sit through it for two reasons. One, I'm legit uncomfortable watching Tim Pool deal with Sam. I'm not going to lie. I don't know much about Tim Pool. He seems like he's, you know, some type of IDW adjacent guy.
His space has always been very bizarre to me, like what space he occupies in the online discourse or whatever you want to call it. Because, I mean, I worked with him when I was at Fusion, and they hired him to a huge contract.
Nice guy?
I guess so.
I mean, he seems like the type of person who it's like, you know, and it's funny because it's like the type of dynamic that I get annoyed with woke scolds with this. And of course, I utterly loathe reactionaries on this. But like the type of guy who would probably be like, you know, I don't know, from what I've seen of him, like, you know, global corporations are burning the Amazon. But like, have you seen this new thing that the Oberlin students are doing? That's ridiculous, folks. Like kind of that sort of lane. You know, basically just utterly boring, eye off the ball, and probably whitewashing for some of the worst people in this country.
What's his deal? Is he a conservative?
I think he's one of these people who like always happens to align with conservatives, but isn't conservative. Honestly, I don't really know. I haven't done the deep dive on Tim Pool yet. And after watching this, if this is what he has to offer, it literally makes me embarrassed to watch. And, you know, Sam here clearly is like, oh, I live for this. Stupid arguments that make no sense over Skype. Yes, please. I'm going to lock my children in the other room. All right. Guys, honestly, watching Tim Pool say this literally makes me embarrassed.
Also, shout out to Brendan Carrot, I think, on Twitter, who edited the video just slightly.
Jesus Christ. And look at Sam and oh my God, with the eyebrows
licking
popping,
his chops.
chops licking, big glasses, nose, everything is just, oh, debate. Okay.
I would vote for someone who is going to create less concentration.
All right, pause it. I'm sorry. This goes back to an Pause it. This is a piece of Majority Report lore. I think it was during the Obama election, where basically Sam said, if one candidate's proposing 30 concentration camps and another proposes 10, I'm voting for the one who proposes 10. Now, I understand why people find this particular thought experiment to be off-putting, but the very obvious and not particularly hard to figure out point here is that voting, unless you have the opportunity to vote for like a Bernie Sanders, and certainly in 2012, was a highly utilitarian activity, and you were putting a choice. There is a column A, column B choice. Both are going to cause a huge amount of injustice and suffering, one less than the other. So what you do is you go and you opt for less suffering, because voting is not really about a personal expression of your essence. It's about a practical activity. So I might have used a different metaphor, but that's all Sam is saying. It's pretty frigging simple, but let's see how this goes in a freshman philosophy bong choke direction.
I would vote for someone who is going to create less concentration camps.
So you're willing to put your weight behind somebody who's going to make concentration camps?
No, I'm not willing to put. I'm willing to put my weight behind diminishing the number of concentration camps.
I think that before you go, it's a really great point that I think may separate. It's utilitarianism versus deontologism, that you're quantifying versus I'm not. You see what I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm saying your philosophical standard is the minimization of harm, and mine is more about the individual is the small, you know what I mean? Like, yeah.
I'm curious about the second part of that. You said, you know what I mean, because I really don't.
Oh,
mine is
so
about minimization of harm.
The two philosophies
about feeling
violating the ethics of an individual is violating ethics regardless, and yours is minimization of harm is better. So utilitarian versus deontological. From my standpoint, committing one unethical act is a violation of principle and ethics that can't be crossed. But I will admit, there's not like a hard line.
I think that is silly, to be honest with you.
I mean, I respect you, but they're very strong philosophical positions held by most people.
I believe that less suffering is better, and that I am willing to.
I will tell you something you won't like to hear, though.
I'm willing to sully myself if that's the outcome.
But I'll tell you something you're not going to want to hear, and I admit it's I'll call it dickish. Utilitarianism is typically the villain in most movies.
I don't care.
Yeah. So for instance, like Thanos was utilitarian, and Captain America was deontological.
I didn't.
So Thanos willing to reduce the suffering by killing hundreds of trillions versus the thousands of trillions which would be living better off. So
but I'm not
comic book movies.
I'm not having to kill anybody. I'm just voting and choosing.
I mean, if you vote in favor of somebody who's going to build a concentration camp, you are.
No, one of these people is going to win, Tim.
You don't understand that I'm like physically embarrassed watching that, down to the point that like we've all done a dumb reference. We've all done, we've all had something in our head we thought was funnier or more clever. But, oh my God, the dude is talking about voting, and you think like, Sam, I hate to spring this on you, but you're the villain in a Marvel movie you've never seen. Sorry to give you the bad news. And then, of course, like, this is it's funny because I know I can be a dick, sure. But the difference between me and Sam is that depending on the mood I was in, might actually laugh uncomfortably and go, oh, I guess I got to see that movie. Jesus fucking Christ, who am I talking to? Sam is just going to give you, no, I don't care. And just give you his best, like, I did 3.5 semesters. I did 2 semesters at Boston University Law School.
It's devastating. Hashtag bully the right people.
I mean, you know what? I have no doubt that I'm going to read more about Tim Pool and feel totally comfortable with that bullying session. But on a human level, that to me was like watching LeBron stuff a 4th grader. That gets that type of just visceral, like, all right, LeBron, like, wait for it. Like, throwing the ball up, not even shooting it. Throw up, and then instead of being like the nice, like, what you're supposed to do, which is like catch it and then dunk it and be like, oh, whoa, look at that. LeBron just goes poof, like LeBron just treats the kid like a Hong Kong protester, just stuffs it in his face. That was what watching that was like to me. It was just like, I know that he thought that was a gotcha.
Premising your argument in support of like the Avengers with Sam is like one of the worst things you can do.
Oh my God. Is there a word for that? Do we need to call it Ben Burgess?
Sam will dismiss like at times like important theoretical distinctions in the pursuit of like his, OJ attorney argument. And you're going to come at me or come at him with a frigging Avengers movie?
Argumentum ad Avengers Movium.
I am still embarrassed from seeing that. And he giggled like he had something.
And Sam never gets tired of this either.
No, Sam's like, Sam is like texting H. John Benjamin. Like, have you seen this new Avengers movie?
It's like extremely his shit. But you know what? Better Tim Pool than me. So I'm happy about it.
I can't believe. I don't think that exchange with Tim Pool is going to help Steven Crowder or Dave Rubin agree. You're kind of like the guy in the new Avengers movie.
Oh, good point. If he's trying to get Crowder to debate him, maybe he should pretend that he's like a nice debater for a while.
You know what one guy actually he said to me? He said, and I'm not trying to get myself in this, but somebody recommended that Sam and I dress as college students and roam around looking for a Crowder. And we're like, no, we're not from the Majority Report. We're college students. Yes, change our minds.
That would be so good.
That would be great.
That would be so fucking funny. Oh my God. I don't know why. Maybe I'm overreacting, but I found that to be so unbelievably uncomfortable to watch that I don't even know how to put it into words, but maybe I'm...
He seems like he sucks.
Dude, of course he sucks, but Jesus Christ. I mean, I don't know. Joe Biden sucks. I didn't enjoy watching his blood vessel pop. I'm sorry. I'm not an edgelord on this. I did not enjoy watching an old man have it be like, hey, my son didn't do any crimes.
Yeah.
That made me uncomfortable. Watching that guy go, well, I hate to rain on your parade about tactical voting, but have you seen Thanos? That is fucking embarrassing. That is truly embarrassing.
It's like how much he sucks. It's like the blood vessel pop in debate form.
That's literally.
And we've seen Sam do a lot of these debates at this point. I would posit that maybe the joy was not exactly in this one as much as it has been.
You know what? That is actually true. Sam did look a little bit more long on the tooth. Like it was, I guess it just isn't the same joy as like just the pure expression of like, well, guess what? Tell you what if we didn't sign a civil rights bill, I think we would live in a transracial utopia now.
Yeah.
You know, like when you get that real, like, I mean,
galaxy brain
light
shit.
bulbs or Stalin. Like that is more fun than Thanos. Oh my God. You're calling from I cannot watch all of that debate. You're calling from a 972 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hey, this is Ben in Seattle.
Hey, Ben, what's going on? What's on your mind?
Not too much. I wanted to give a shout out or a thanks to you for giving a shout out to Kshama Sawant.
Excuse me, Kshama Sawant. I said Kshama. I apologize. Kshama Sawant, very important candidate.
Kshama.
Okay.
It's spelled like
she's the
Kshama.
real deal. She's awesome. I still regret that I left the community college where she was teaching economics, and I could have taken a class with her before she became a council member, but it's okay. But I just wanted to bring up, because there was obviously no one really cares about her anymore, Kirsten Gillibrand, or is it Kirsten Gillibrand?
I don't remember.
But she had brought up a possible sort of like money in politics reform, and we have a program similar to that here in Seattle. And as you can see, being able to give a few $100 to a city council member doesn't really mean a whole lot when Amazon can dump 1 million here, 2 million here, 3 million here. And it's a little bit hard. And I'm kind of wondering what you guys' take is on holding national politicians accountable for maybe not supporting the left-wing challengers in their own city. And I'm kind of wondering what sort of strategies you would maybe recommend or other ideas. I'm mainly thinking of Pramila Jayapal. I haven't really named it.
Oh,
So
she
that's
hasn't.
kind
She
of where
hasn't. She hasn't stood on the right side of that city council race. Well, I got to say today.
hasn't really taken a.
So it just so happens. I mean, obviously, I never miss an opportunity to support the Bernie campaign, but I did notice. I think just today, the Bernie campaign tweeted out support of Sawant. So I think there's another real distinction there for you. But no, I think it's a big problem. I think that, this is where the rubber meets the road, right? Like,
yeah.
I mean, I don't have much to. I think the first question on campaign funding is interesting, and I'll admit that I'm less oriented around campaign funding than other people. Not in the sense I think it's extremely important, but I do think that some people talk about campaign funding in a way that is isolated from capitalism. And I don't think no matter how many regulations you can have, can you fundamentally reorient power in society, which capital represents. That said, and so that's a great example of just like what Amazon can do in terms of terrorizing politics in Seattle. As for your second, I don't know the answer to that other than, people power, which includes grassroots fundraising, obviously. But but I think, as far as endorsing Sawant, yeah, that's like the type of thing where that's a real obvious distinction. And I would still support Jayapal. I think she's a great congresswoman, but I think it speaks volumes that you're not willing to get involved in a local fight like that with somebody who really represents something incredibly positive and important. And I think it applies to, a lot of these congressional races too, frankly. All across the country. Totally. I get messages regularly now. We get messages from people. I hesitate to even start naming people because there's so many great candidates. But I think of people like, Michaela Wilkes and Shahid Buttar, who are obviously, that's even more guts because they're taking on like the two, Democratic leaders, the horrible sclerotic Steny Hoyer and Nancy Pelosi. But there's a candidate, taking on Yvette Clarke in Brooklyn. There's all across the country, Lauren Ashcroft. Those are the candidates that you would speak out with and support if you want to start changing the ball game. And then I actually just want to say really quick, it's not just because they're young or represent something new. Because on the flip side, Kennedy's going to use all that rhetoric against Markey, and Markey is absolutely the progressive choice in Massachusetts. Kennedy sucks. Vote Ed Markey. But anyways, yes, Jamie.
I was just going to add that, I've always said, I'm skeptical of what electoral politics can do on their own. However, I did see it firsthand what electoral politics can do in the vote on de Blasio's jail plan last week, which was very narrow, but it passed. And it just makes me extra sure, where maybe I wasn't so sure before.
Tell people about it.
Oh, well, Bill de Blasio, our very progressive Big Bird mayor, had a plan to shut down Rikers Island and replace it with 4 new jails, but he's not going to call them jails. He's going to call them justice hubs. They're jails. They're still being overseen by the Department of Corrections, which is notoriously resistant to oversight and reform. And this passed over the objections of a competing plan to spend the $11 billion instead on decarceration, investing in communities, harm reduction programs, education, all the things that have been shown to reduce jail populations. And the jail population of any given city is not this like inelastic number, by the way. Studies have shown if you build the jails, you're going to fill the jails. If you close down a jail, like what happened in Cincinnati, the cops actually arrest fewer people. They figure out a way to do without putting all those people in jail.
Do you remember a couple of years ago when the NYPD decided they were all pissed at de Blasio? And so they said, we're going to stop enforcing all of these petty crimes, which are, the secret sauce of terrorizing poor people in the city.
No more broken windows policing.
Right. So they did that. And all of a sudden, people weren't getting arrested and harassed for smoking pot or graffiti or whatever. And guess what? Nothing happened from the perspective of serious crime.
It's like, great, go away.
Yeah.
We don't need you.
Terrific.
But
yes.
It made me like super sure that we need to do this plan, which passed at the NYC DSA convention last year to elect a socialist city council in 2021, because my city council rep voted for the new jails and I don't want him representing me anymore.
Appreciate the calls. What's your name again?
Thanks. Ben from Seattle. I'm at Marxist Nanny on Twitter.
At Marxist Nanny. We know you. Thank you, Ben.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.
Do you do a podcast too, Ben?
Yeah. It's
Plug it.
Called Unpopular Front.
Unpopular Front.
I had a bunch of...
Oh, you're cutting out. Check out Unpopular Front. Thanks, Ben.
Yeah. Thanks, man.
All right. Is Mick Mulvaney trying to get fired? Last week, or a couple days ago, he said, yeah, of course we were holding up to aid to Ukraine. It's called a quid pro quo. That's kind of like the line that makes me like Chris Matthews sometimes. Like sometimes Chris Matthews will get very honest about like, yeah, it's called a quid pro quo. We're holding up aid for political intelligence. That's what Tip O'Neill did. It's called a quid pro quo. Now, Mick Mulvaney is on Fox News, and he's responding to basically Trump wanting to host the G7 summit at his private golf club.
Which he's no longer doing.
Which he is no longer doing after a apparent exhaustion of Republicans being like, dude, how many different corrupt, self-enriching things can you do? We've got our own disgusting things that we've got to defend. Give us a little space. This is Mick Mulvaney, I think, not exactly helping. And of course, remember, Mick Mulvaney is a extraordinarily disgusting, horrible, horrible person.
President Trump has decided, after he put you out there at that briefing to announce Doral, he's decided that he's not going to hold it at Doral. He blames it on, quote, the hostile media and their Democratic partners. But again, he was getting hammered by Republicans. So why did he cave?
We talked about it at great length last night. And it's not lost on me that if we had made the decision on Thursday, we wouldn't have had the press conference on Thursday regarding everything else. That's fine. But we did talk about it last night. And I honestly think what you saw in the tweet was real. The president isn't one for holding back his feelings and his emotions about something. He was honestly surprised at the level of pushback. At the end of the day, he still considers himself to be in the hospitality business, and he saw an opportunity to take the biggest leaders from around the world, and he wanted to put on the absolute best show, the best visit that he possibly could, and he was very comfortable doing that at Doral. And I think we were all surprised at the level of pushback. I think it's the right decision to change. We'll have to find someplace else, and my guess is we'll find someplace else that the media won't like either for another reason.
I just have to pick up. You say he considers himself in the hospitality business.
Because he'll be a silent partner in the other place. Like, that's like saying, wait, let's do the one that Ivanka owns. And make sure to say that everybody will hate that too, because they will, because they're so unfair.
For another reason.
I just have to pick up. You say he considers himself in the hospitality business. He's the president of the United States.
Yeah. But that's his background. It's like, I used to be in the real estate business. I don't know what you used to do before you were in media, if anything. That's all I've ever done. But he wanted...
Because you're a trust fund baby, nepotism case. Go ahead.
In media, if anything.
That's all I've ever done.
He wanted to put on a show. He wanted to take care of folks. That's the business. He's in the hotel business, or at least he was.
Does he understand? Forget the media, and does he understand that it looked lousy?
Well, I think he knows. He thinks that people think it looks lousy. Could we have put on an excellent G7 at Doral? Absolutely. Will we end up putting on an excellent G7 someplace else? Yes, we will.
Oh, my God.
It's got Mulvaney in the hospitality industry now, too.
Oh, my God. I mean, what's more of a hospitality job than being president?
You were in here on Friday, but we played a clip from the press conference where Mulvaney basically gives like a timeshare like sales pitch of why to go to Doral. And it was just,
it's like Diamond Resorts International, except exclusive.
He's acting like Trump's going to be like running around making all the canapes himself. Like
you never know.
You're not doing shit, dude.
You never know.
You own the thing.
Isn't
That's
that
all.
fantastic?
It's also great. Like when
my friend Frank Catone makes the best lasagna. He used to be the Bonanno family. Isn't everybody excited to be here?
I really wanted everyone to meet George at the prime rib counter. He's such a nice guy.
Such a nice guy. He's a terrific guy. Hasn't been paid in 20 years. Still loves it here.
Lost a finger, didn't have good health insurance.
Lost a finger.
But, he's pretty good with 9.
Yeah, we bandaged it right up, and he's still out there. He's still making the cake. Isn't that unbelievable?
It's amazing.
It's a terrific guy.
It's like when you pull a totally boner move that you know is bad, and someone gets annoyed, and you're like, oh, did you not want me to pee on your leg? I didn't realize.
Oh, I guess we don't want great hospitality. People are always saying that we should be kind to everybody and not racist. And then I try to do the G7 and give everybody, no matter where they're from, a great time. But I guess we don't want our friends in the G7 to have a great time. By the way, I'm not going to talk unless somebody calls or IMs about it. But Trump's tweet on the Tulsi HRC drama was the funniest thing I have seen in days.
Oh, my God.
Did you see that one?
No.
He said, I'm paraphrasing, maybe we have to find it, but he said, Crooked Hillary is now accusing Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard of being a Russian asset and Green Party candidate Jill Stein. I, as you may remember, was accused of being a big Russia lover. And then he goes in parentheses and goes, actually, I do like Russian people. I like all people.
Oh
She's gone crazy.
So good.
And then he did one specifically for Jill Stein, which included the phrase, thank God we have a Green Party because of the Democrats' disastrous environmental program. He's been shining the last few days on Twitter. That's really all he should be doing. It's like just try to do corrupt deals and tweet. Testing IMs. Mike, what are you talking about? Mike, are you going to be talking about the rally in more detail this week? I will definitely be talking in more detail on TMBS, I think with John Iderola. We need to stop at the Tulsi Yang nonsense and get these people behind Bernie. Abso-fucking-lutely. Please. Tim Pool can be described as a grifter lefty whose entire career is built on hating the left. Oh, okay, it sounds right. He's one of those like, I'm left wing. Okay, I see. I get it. I mean, I think I already basically knew that. I just didn't know like the specifics of how he. But I'm starting to get it.
The specifics are kind of hard to pin down. I think ultimately it's a bit.
He's a classical liberal.
You're Thanos. You'll hate to find this out, but you're the bad guy in the Marvel movie. I will say though. Following Liz Franzik, why is it though? And I wouldn't have known about Thanos if I didn't listen to that podcast because I don't watch Marvel movies. But why is it that the sympathetic villain is a Malthusian population control guy? And why is it that we give Bill Gates a total pass on his obsession with developing country birth rates? As Jadakiss would say, why?
Seriously.
I just want to put that in the mix.
Oh, people are telling me that I should let everyone know that I did an episode on prison abolition recently on the Intifada with an organizer from No New Jails. So check it out if you're interested in learning more.
Awesome. All right, let's take another call. You're calling from a 308 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hey, it's Kowalski.
Hey, Kowalski. How are you, my friend? You remind me, in some ways, it's very different, but my friend Luke Mayville from Idaho, there's a slightly, he used to say, like, you want to go get a bear? Slightly similar. Yours is a little drier, but I like the accent. I like the voice. Kowalski, what's on your mind, my friend?
Hey, I just wanted to give you guys a little bit of, like, just some good news for Monday.
Please. I love it.
So, all right. I believe I told you guys about how, like, social media was pretty bad a few weeks ago. Well, something interesting is going on. The hardcore defenders of Trump along our Facebook, our local news media has Facebook, reports and stuff out. And they usually have a lot of hardcore Trump defenders on it.
Mm-hmm.
They're going away. They're hiding. They're running for the hills.
That's fantastic. Why do you think that is?
It's just indefensible at this point.
Word.
Which, I mean, like, just so your viewers are aware, if that continues, that is going to give senators a lot of, okay, I need to distance myself. This guy's a liability, not an asset.
The Trump defenders have logged off.
From your lips to God's ears, Kowalski, although I think there's something to it. I appreciate the call, man.
They're just not going to be public. I mean, they're still there. It's just, they're not going to be open about it. So
they're not going to be as arrogant about it.
Yes.
Right.
But before I go, just real quick,
Okay.
Today is my birthday, and over the weekend we had a wedding, and while I was there, I was discussing my views on Medicare for All, and absolutely everyone loved it. The small business people loved it. The elderly that were retired loved it. These are all right-wing, like, evangelical people. If you can explain to them how this is going to help them, they will go for it. So, yes, just Warren's an idiot. Tell them their taxes will go up, but explain, the better aspects of it. But
would they
I'll
vote?
let you go.
Would they vote for a pro-choice candidate? Do you think?
No, but that's not really like a main topic. I think anybody's really concerned with. Like, that's just something people pull out. They grandstand on, but. Not to mention, like I've explained to a couple people who have asked me that, Medicare for All would reduce the number of abortions because it would, give you availability of more contraception, while at the same time plummet the cost of prenatal care.
And also, by the way,
it might reduce the number of abortions.
By the way,
I don't think that's a good grounds on which to defend it, though.
Well, for the people he's talking to,
because there's no guarantee that it will.
I think for the people he's talking to, that's worth mentioning. I also would say, even more salient, if you want to suggest that you care about life, it would plummet infant mortality, which is a huge problem in this country. Kowalski, you firmly in the Bernie camp?
I am firmly in the camp. For political reasons, I'm probably not going to publicly say it unless I win the primary, in which case this is going to be a very interesting slugfest.
I love it. The Republican
I'm
who
a
free
farmer, and if there's anything we are, it is persistent.
Kowalski, you're amazing. Happy birthday. Thank you so much. Here's a shofar. A Jew
Free
horn.
Lula, boys.
Free Lula. Thank you, Kowalski. Kowalski. By the way, I really do think, especially if you're running a local race in a certain part of the world, in a certain part of the country, run as a leftist in a Republican primary. I think that's such a good idea.
That's what I've been saying.
Yeah, you and I have been on that train for a while. I just wanted to reiterate it. I think it's a great idea. You're calling from a 917 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Oh, hey, Michael. Good afternoon. This is Waterboy from Kashmir.
Hey, how you doing? What's going on?
Nothing's great, but we're fine, and I was glad about Bernie. Gives me hope for the future.
Mm-hmm.
A couple of updates, one from the eastern side of the border, and one from west. I'll start with the west. I don't know if you guys have been following this, but things are getting a little bit kinetic between India and Pakistan at the in Kashmir, along the border there.
Yeah.
Like 6 people have died. Civilians, that is.
Civilians on both sides, in Pakistan and in India, or?
On the Pakistani side of Kashmir, 6 people died, and on the Indian, civilians. And on the Indian side, so far, 1 confirmed dead. But there isn't much information coming out from there because, well, there's no media, so
Right.
it's hard to tell. But
I'll
so
catch up
far,
on it tomorrow. Yeah.
So this is not a joke because it's not. They have rules of engagement that they've had for the past 30 years, and it's not like some sinister person is going to be like, all right, let's start a war. When things escalate, it's like hard to come back. It's like a machine unto itself.
Right.
It's really hard to describe.
Right.
So yeah, keeping that in mind, I'll just mention instead of like a actual big update, just like one aspect of what's happening in the on the Indian side. There's an article in what was it? Oh, good God, I forgot the name of the Telegraph India. This morning that I was reading, that 4 days after the shutdown happened, and on August 5th, so people realized why the shutdown was happening. It took a few days, but people figured out that basically the economy was gone. And obviously people were distraught, and then this one part of...
wait, just slow down, sorry. So the Indian economy is running into big headwinds right now.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
And... it's actually some analysts are saying that's probably one of the reasons why they accelerated this, because this was not supposed to happen, according to the same analysts, for like another year until Modi was a little bit more situated. But it's a perfect storm, I suppose. The Indian economy is in fact slowing down a lot. They've lost over I don't know how many millions of jobs this year so far. I don't know what the actual number is, but it's in the millions.
Okay.
It's a billion people, so it's the numbers just magnify. Well, anyway, so this was 4 days after, and so people like the local people, including women, went to the mosque because for them it's to use the Palestinian term, it's a Nakba happening in front of their eyes. It is a catastrophe that it's hard to describe. Mm-hmm. So and they're crying. Nobody's saying anything. They just go in, they pray, and then everybody just like starts crying. So they had posted soldiers everywhere throughout the city, and so they heard, like these wailing sounds coming from this mosque, and so the soldiers kind of got a little nervous, and they went up there like, hey, what's going on? And then nobody wants to answer what's going on because everybody knows what the reasoning is. And then the officer there is like, listen, just no more of this. We don't want to see this again. As in, don't cry. Just think, like a nuanced thing, but just think about this. Like, don't do this in public.
Yep.
Right? And in the same article, they were saying that these soldiers were actually brought in. They're like new. They were not the veterans of the occupation, so to speak. So, they weren't so harsh. And I believe that because the people that have been there for a while, the soldiers, they would not have told them to stop crying. They would have broken into the mosque and started beating up the people. Right. So there's a psychological toll. As that builds up, people will react. And if things are getting kinetic at the border, things will get out of control. So
I'll catch up with it tomorrow. Thank you for the call, man.
Yeah.
Solidarity.
All right. Have a nice day.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Bye-bye.
Sorry. Jesus. All right. Let's do. We'll get to some stories in a second, but let's follow up on Mulvaney. Mike Pompeo is rapidly changing from. Look, he was the congressman from Koch in Kansas, in Congress from Kansas. Extreme far right, fanatic corporatist, and he was Trump's CIA director, and now Secretary of State. And it's always like, is this guy on the side of the equation of like a quasi-competent person who knows how to manipulate Trump? Or is he basically just another long line of empty sacks of nothing that Trump has cucked? And at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter because it's all one Republican global corporate empire agenda. But it is funny to watch him get increasingly pressed and stressed as this process goes on. Here he is. This is clip number 6, talking about Mulvaney basically saying on television, the Chris Matthews, like, oh, no, it was a quid pro quo. Quid pro quo.
Do you agree then with Senator McCaskey that it would have been inappropriate to withhold the military aid unless this political investigation was pursued?
George, I'm telling you what I was involved with. I'm telling you what I saw transpiring and how President Trump was working to make the evaluation about whether it was appropriate to provide this assistance.
But that's what I'm asking is, would it be appropriate to condition that?
Yeah, George, I'm not going to get into hypotheticals and secondary things based on what someone else has said. George, you would have never done it when you were the spokesman. I'm not going to do it here today.
Except it's not a hypothetical. We saw the chief of staff, the acting
It
chief
is,
of staff
George. You
right
just
there.
said George, you just said if this happened. That is by definition a hypothetical.
The chief of staff said it did.
George, you asked me if this happened. It's a hypothetical. I've told you what I observed, what I saw the process related to this very funding. What we did and how we thought about that was aimed at the strategic interests of the United States of America in the right and appropriate way to ensure that there wasn't corruption in Ukraine that would divert these resources to an
inappropriate end. Lock them up, maybe?
More and more people are saying it.
More and more people are saying, lock them up. And by the way, as I always say, there's no contradiction between recognizing the unbelievable corruption of this White House and its encroachment in every step of the process with understanding that we're not CIA Democrats and that the intelligence community is a structural threat to our liberty and always has been from the very foundation of all of these agencies that always violate our rights. These are all part of the same process, in fact, if you care about civil liberties. And it's hilarious. I'll just say, I'm trying to think of a tasteful way to say this. I think it's very funny how pressed Mike Pompeo's looking. That is the only entertainment value I'm seeing. Okay, let's go to clip number 15. In Chile, there have been mass demonstrations going on for several days now. The immediate precipitating cause, I believe, was a fare rise in the subways. The first response from the Sebastián Piñera government, which was elected a couple years ago, he's a right-wing businessman, he represents the right in Chile, was that people of lower incomes should ride the subways and use public transport in non-peak hours if it was too much for them. So in other words, go to work earlier and earlier and go home later and later. You should suffer as a person and as a social economic class because of new austerity. Now, the demonstrations have been aggressive and powerful, and you have military control in certain parts of the city, which have not, in certain parts of the country, which has not been the case since the formal end of the Pinochet dictatorship. Augusto Pinochet, of course, came to power in 1973 with the backing of the United States. It was Chile's September 11th. There was a powerful leader in Salvador Allende and associated social movements. The CIA and the Nixon administration helped put an end to it. And Augusto Pinochet would go on to kill thousands of innocent people in Chile. The Chilean government would actually commit an act of terrorism in Washington, D.C. when they blew up a former ambassador's car in a car bombing. Who was speaking out against the regime. And they would coordinate, along with the United States, with other right-wing juntas across Latin America in something called the Operation Condor, where they coordinated across borders to murder liberals and leftists and commit atrocities. So there's a huge amount of visual and political power in seeing the military back on the streets. Let's play a little bit of footage here from some protests in Chile and then come back to me. I guess, does this have sound or no? I guess not. Okay. So Piñera has backed down on the subway hike. But the bigger context that exists here is that, you know, unlike in Brazil, where because the labor union movement led by Lula in the 80s was instrumental, the military dictatorship was in no small part, was brought down in the main by the labor union movement. its democratic constitution did some real things to ensure labor protections. That's under assault today. The Chilean transition did not. It got rid of Pinochet. It formalized democracy. But it did not have corresponding reforms in the structural inequities that have defined Chile for hundreds of years. I mean, Chile is relatively wealthy, and it might be the most unequal, if not one of the most unequal in the region. So you've had some social democratic governments which have done some decent reforms, but they are certainly not radical. They have not had the same types of achievements in terms of poverty reductions that other pink tide governments had, as an example. And now you have a right-wing oligarchic government, which certainly has remnants that go back to the Pinochet era. And this follows the World Bank IMF pattern. I mean, we're going to get to Lebanon and Iraq in a second. I've been following Haiti and Ecuador extensively on TMBS. Please look up what's happening in Haiti. Very specifically, it's extremely important. These are all World Bank IMF-guided austerity policies that still terrorize most people across the globe in conjunction with local elites. That's the context of what you see in Chile, and it corresponds with existing radical social movements that exist in the student sphere, that exist in the communist sphere, that exist in the indigenous sphere. So we'll keep following this as it plays out, obviously.
Seems like things are popping off all over the world right now.
They are popping off all over the world. In Lebanon and Iraq, I think these protests really parallel what's happened in Sudan. The Sudanese movement of 2018, which is still ongoing and still in conflict, was fundamentally about reversing austerity. It was reversing these profound inequities. You're seeing it in Iran. Iran has one of the highest Gini coefficients in the world, in spite of the rhetoric of equality of the Islamic Republic. So there's, and even as there's always U.S. attempts to destabilize Iran, there are organic labor movements inside Iran. Lebanon and Iraq maybe are particularly significant because of the non-sectarian nature of the uprisings, right? So in Iraq and Lebanon, you do have much more relative openness than, say, the Gulf monarchies, without any of the same, corresponding wealth that is able to be spread around the place, like the United Arab Emirates or Saudi Arabia, which are, particularly Saudi, extremely repressive, but all literally monarchies. In Lebanon and so on, there's a much more combative press and journalistic culture. There's much more argument, but it's a system that is based on representation of the ethnic blocks. You have a Sunni in one position, you have a Shia in another position, you have a Christian in another, right? And in Iraq, it's Kurdish, along with Sunni and Shia. So that obviously is a lock on democratic possibility, because it is in narrow sectarian terms in terms of what can literally happen. It disincentivizes professionalizing operations because things are in extremely narrow patronage networks. And it blocks what the dream always is, right? Which is cross-boundary, cross-identity, class organizing in extremely unequal societies. Iraq does have a communist party. Lebanon has Marxist factions. And these protests in both places, particularly in Lebanon, which I've seen more of, but I think also in Iraq, have this very powerful anti-austerity, cross-sectarian, class-based component. And they've already seen in Lebanon some real reversals. The government has agreed to a set of reforms. It's announced that it's pulling back from the austerity measures that it had been trying to push through before. And basically, the Prime Minister Hariri has addressed the nation and said that they're going to try to put the country's finances in order. Obviously, that's complicated because they're also talking about deficit, shrinking the deficit, which you don't want to have rolled onto most Lebanese people, of course. Hundreds of thousands of people have taken to the streets. Some people waving flags saying they want to bring down the regime, which, as I say, is pretty significant because this is the sort of regime, placeholder regime, that has basically kept peace in the country in a way since the Civil War ended, I believe, in 1990, but has locked in these really dysfunctional distribution systems. I'll cover most I'll cover these stories more, but people have been asking me, so I wanted to do a little bit as best I could to get people up to date a little bit on Lebanon and Chile.
The old world is dying. The new world struggles to be born.
Hello. One thing this show points out regularly is the fact that one of the biggest areas of influence and power a president actually has in the area of foreign policy and diplomacy. In addition to this, I don't think it can be understated how important the power of choosing department secretaries is. For example, having a HUD secretary who believes billionaires are a failure of the government and rent control should be mandatory versus having a department head who believes the quote-unquote market can be incentivized to do good and penalize greed to discourage bad behavior is crucially important difference. Yes, Colorado guy. Much love, MR Crew, Lula Libre. Jazzoid, WTF, okay. New poll showing Buttigieg in third place, Bernie in fourth, has methodology of only 500 landline only polled. I smell a setup. That is a funky methodology. I'll give you that. I'm not really obsessed with unskewing the polls, but look, this is also though the same. There's a poll that just came out that shows that that Biden and Warren are in statistical ties in Iowa with Trump, and Bernie's beating Trump by 10 points. And the Hill leads with Biden and Warren struggle against Trump in Iowa. And now the next phase is New York Magazine and Washington Post and several others took quotes that Bernie said in the debate and attributed them to Warren. So the bias, the erasure is very clear. I mean, it's totally discrediting and embarrassing.
They're telling on themselves.
Telling on themselves every second. Steph from Chicago, as someone who's been a social worker, your guest phrase "empathy override" resonated with me. There were times I broke the standard protocol because I knew it wasn't best for my client. I easily could have lost my job and been blacklisted if my superiors discovered that I exercised individual discretion. Absolutely. All right, let's do one more piece of sound. This is funny. Basically, Rahm Emanuel, who is one of the worst human beings in global politics, who has a record of racism, of increasing inequality, of attacking teachers' unions, of being an advocate for war and against healthcare. I guess he needs to somehow keep his brand slightly relevant. So here he is on ABC News, speaking in support of a very modest wealth tax that Warren has put forward, and something that he has never supported and never done anything to forward in his entire career. That's still shocking for George Stephanopoulos, who does have a split second of deranged self-awareness.
The 2% tax on people that earn above $50 million is a winner in the primary and winner in the the wealth tax. And why we
winner in the general?
Definitely.
Yeah. Majority.
Seen all the polling on it. Independent voters, because the Republicans are going to fight it, and people are going to say this is both equity and fairness.
Yeah, it shows I live in Manhattan.
Yes,
place is not popular.
Wrong zip code.
That's all we have time for today. Thanks for.
Yes.
Laughing a little bit too hard at that realization.
I mean, he's laughing so hard that I want to know his net assets.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that is just like, yes, any sentient human being who's not an oligarch would support more than that. I don't know how delusional you have to be.
What do you think of the Republican base that would support a $50 million tax?
I don't think it exists. I think most of them do. I mean, it is an objective poll winner, as insofar as you can be objective about these things. I mean, that's mind-blowing.
That's weird. Nobody I had lunch with at Balthazar today supports the wealth tax.
You sure about that? Yeah, exactly. All right, let's take a final call. Let's see. You're calling from a 602 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Is this me? Am I on?
Yes, you're on. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
All right. Thank you. This is John from Phoenix, Arizona.
Hey, John. What's going on? What's on your mind?
I've been wanting to talk about when you guys were talking about AOC's endorsement of Bernie. It really comes down to just two things that you or I or anybody else choose when we support Bernie, and that's he's got the best policies. We know he can win.
Yep.
You know, and it's
Not that
basically that
complicated.
simple.
Yep.
It makes you or I or AOC's endorsement of him pretty much unimpeachable when you just stick to those two facts. You could talk about, whether or not it's the right political strategy for her, or, be shocked about her or Ilhan Omar or Rashida Tlaib, remaining Justice Democrats that they were elected as. I don't think that's shocking. I mean, it's
right.
Inspiring that we have politicians that are sticking to their values.
Yeah, of course.
But,
right.
I want to tie in something from the debate last week that I think highlights the courage that they chose when they choose to endorse now. Back in the debate last week, towards the end, it's probably the last time they asked, second to last time they asked Bernie a question. Anderson Cooper asked Bernie, "Why is your approach the best to take on Trump?" And Bernie says, "I'll tell you why, Anderson. It's because it's what the American people want." Right. And as soon as he says that, Elizabeth Warren has a hot mic where she says yes.
Right.
So does she know that Bernie can win? Does she know that Bernie can beat Trump?
I don't. I mean, obviously, I can't speak into her head. Of course not. I mean, I think. But I mean, obviously, look, with each step, I mean, she's been, she mimics and sort of duplicates his rhetoric. I think, the argument about how they plan to approach these problems and the scale at which they have to address these problems is very, very different. But clearly, look, as I always say, they're radically different things. Bernie's the left choice, obviously, and obviously relative to the field, they stick out on a lot of these questions on the debate stage because a vast majority of people on the debate stage are basically saying, like, American people don't deserve shit. We can't do anything. And so,
right.
and I think that's as basic as it is, and I think,
the
only interesting argument is between Sanders and Warren. I mean, that's it. And obviously, I think, one set of arguments are weak relative to the others, but everything else, Biden, Buttigieg, Klobuchar, it's all just, yeah, we should just keep having a system that's terrible for most people, and we'll make it slightly less offensive. Thanks for the call, man. I appreciate it. All right. Final call of the day. As always, we cannot get to all of you. I'm going to trying to find someone who's waited for a while. You're calling from an 802 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hi, this is Abby from Vermont.
Hey, Abby. How's it going?
Hey.
What's on your mind?
Oh, great. Hey, I've never thought I'd get through. But
here you are.
I just want to give a shout out to a group in Vermont called Migrant Justice.
Okay, cool.
They do a lot of work with they are the farm workers. They do a lot of work in the dairy industry. It's kind of similar to that farm working group with the tomatoes that I can't pronounce.
I don't know.
Down in Florida.
Oh,
but,
I don't know.
Yeah, but they're having a big day of action on October 2nd, or November 2nd. If you just Google Migrant Justice, you can find out all the Hannaford. They're targeting the Hannaford grocery chain in the Northeast.
Yep.
To get them to change their supply lines, because all the milk that they've done it with Ben & Jerry's, the Milk with Dignity program. If you just Google Migrant Justice Milk with Dignity, you can see I'm not sure exactly what's going on that day or what's been released public yet, but you can find out pretty easy online.
Thanks, Abby. Appreciate it.
No problem.
We'll look it up. Have
Love
a
the
great
show.
one. Oh, appreciate it.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. All right, folks. Sorry, no more calls today. Tomorrow will be the same deal. Do you know who the interview is tomorrow, Brendan?
It is Diversity Inc. by Pamela Newkirk.
Oh, that sounds like a Walter Ben Michaels book. Also a great author. People should check him out. All right, a few more IMs, and we will get out of here. I love Sarah Palin. Hey, guys, listen, I don't like Trump as much as the next guy, but we have to treat him fairly on this Ukraine thing. The story sounds similar to Iran-Contra to me, and we didn't impeach Reagan. Why should we treat Trump differently? I don't even understand your point. I mean, I would actually say Iran-Contra was infinitely more serious than this, and we should have impeached Reagan and treat Trump fairly. Are you trying to joke? I don't get it. Why would I treat Trump fairly? This has been Chris from Taiwan. This has been an effective way for me of framing the Bernie rally for people who are undecided. The largest political cycle of this election was not broadcast on a single news outlet and was buried in the back pages of every newspaper. Ask yourself how you think such a rally would have been covered had it been used by any other candidate, and then ask yourself why. That's perfect. That's 100% right. That's 100% right. I mean, look, Elizabeth Warren had a big rally in Manhattan. It was less people than Bernie. It led every type of thing. All of these press outlets that are
every
supposedly...
single person who showed up there works in the media, so
absolutely
makes sense.
Well, Warren is identity politics for journalists. But beyond that, I mean, and even more seriously, I mean, the same, media outlets that profess all this concern that are absolutely disgraceful in their treatment of Sanders and working people across this country gave and still give Trump unending unearned media. So, indeed, that's a great question. Let's see. Final IM of the day. It's a little too much. I like that one, though. Congressional baseball fan. Let's see. Final IM of the day. Let's see. Bullprog. My favorite classic movie Friday was when John Benjamin went to the theater to give a live report from the Avengers. I have no memory of that, but that sounds absolutely hilarious. All right, folks. Thanks. We'll see you tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bar, but finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I guess somewhere the choice was made for the option where you don't get paid, for the rope that bends before it finally breaks you. I guess somehow I lost my drive between the 101